The castle, located in the north, had a history of a century. He was known for taking only women as students, each of whom was beautiful. But there was a guy who continued to train despite the fact that he couldn't cultivate. He still refused to give up, and continuing to work with all his might, he continued to harden his body. But soon after the start, he ran out of breath and leaned his spear on the ground. Out of breath, the guy cursed. He was so exhausted that he could not even stand still and was shaking. Then he fell to the ground, and some girl came up to him. Carrying something with her, she told Mark that he was only harming himself. Mark replied that he was fine and just wanted to practice. But since he was the young master of their clan, he had to take care of himself. The girl continued that if the Lord saw Mark in such a state, he would be unhappy. She continued to be indignant, but suddenly Mark interrupted her. He admitted that trying to cultivate was only hurting him, but he didn't want to give up. And then he invited her to go to the castle, where the Lord was already waiting for them. When they entered, the other girls immediately started gossiping about them. They said without embarrassment that Mark was here only because of his aunt. Mark was considered someone who could only hide behind someone else's back. He was also hated because he was the child of a lord who broke the rule that a lord could not marry and have children. And the mother not only broke her promise, but also ran away afterwards. Suddenly, Mark heard a familiar female voice. Kylie, his aunt, already knew that he had sneaked out of the castle. She started to worry about the guy, but Mark replied that he was fine, because Mark's mother asked her to take care of him. Kylie followed her request, and since he couldn't cultivate, she did everything to help him and support him. Suddenly, Kylie asked what he was thinking about. She said she didn't blame him for cultivating it, but he needed to know his limits. And then she handed over the box and said that it was for him. Mark asked in surprise what it was, and when he opened the box, he saw that inside was a divine tablet made of dragon's blood. Mark knew that this pill was said to be very expensive and valuable because of its properties. Kylie asked to accept this because it could help Mark in cultivation. Mark wanted to object, but Kylie interrupted him and told him to use the pill. At that moment, she was informed that people from the Sky Spirit clan had arrived. In these lands, the factions were divided into 5 levels, and the Heaven and Earth Spirit clan was 1 level higher than the X Castle. Kylie said she needed to take care of some business and asked Mark to go back to his place. Mark knew that the clan wanted their castle to help them penetrate the ancient ruins. However, he was too weak and therefore helpless. Mark wondered if he could make a difference if he could cultivate. His thoughts were interrupted by someone's sharp and loud voice. Mark straightened up in surprise and looked up. A student not from their castle asked to give them the tablet because it would bring more benefit to them. Mark knew that they had brazenly entered their place to find their partners. When he wanted to refuse, Mark was told that he was acting like an upstart just because he was under the protection of the castle. And they called him trash, because even his own mother abandoned Mark. Unable to bear such insults, Mark responded rudely to the guy. But this made him angry, and he swung his arm and was about to hit Mark. Mark was unable to dodge, and the fist collided with his cheek. Unable to withstand the blow, Mark fell to the ground. At that moment, he dropped the box and a pill fell out. When she fell out, everyone immediately noticed her. Mark noticed it too, and then panic set in. But the other guy chuckled and said that Mark didn't need her anyway. Having said that he would take her, the guy extended his hand towards her. But then Mark intercepted his hand, telling him not to touch the pill. Without wasting any more time, he decided to take the pill right away. And when it was in his mouth, he immediately began to chew it. Noticing this, the others got angry at Mark. They rushed at the guy, wanting to force him to spit out the pill. But Mark didn't want to give her up, even if he had to die. As soon as he said this, he saw a strange notification that he had successfully activated the account of the mad pumping system. He didn't understand what happened and how that message came, but I immediately noticed that everyone else simply froze in midair. Then he received a new notification saying that he had received experience points, and after numerous reports that he began to rise in the stages of body refinement. Then he felt the power that filled his body. He swung and hit one of his attackers with all his might. The guy was thrown back far after receiving the blow, and Mark noticed his hand, which was shining. And then a passion ignited within him from the fact that he had such a system. The others couldn't believe that Mark was already at the 5th stage of body refinement. In the world, the stages of cultivation were divided into many stages. Mark did not answer and only asked why they did not see its power for themselves. Then everyone bowed before him and asked him to forgive them, promising that this would not happen again. Mark scornfully told them to either leave or bow down before him. The defeated enemy did not respond, and Mark only turned around. But at that moment, the guy pulled a knife out of his clothes, and suddenly jumping off, he pounced on Mark. But Mark reacted to this and easily stopped the guy's attack. Having lowered him to the ground, Mark became angry that they were still trying to attack him from behind. And grabbing the guy's hand, which held the knife, he thrust the knife into the guy's chest. And then he kicked the guy's already dead body to the side. His comrades turned to look at him and were horrified. Mark guessed that there was poison on the knife, because he had not stuck it in deep enough to kill the guy. For defeating him, he received experience, a recovery pill, and a sword technique. Suddenly a list of these items appeared in front of him. Soon a window appeared in front of him, showing the characteristics of his body. Mark thought these characteristics were like something out of a game. And since Mark was finally able to activate the system, he was given a gift set. Without thinking, the guy decided to open the gift, which contained gift experience, regulatory pills, and a box with gifts. Since his body didn't have the ability to cultivate, he thought that the experience increase system would help him with that. But in front of him was a button with madness mode, and out of curiosity, Mark decided to press it. Then he learned that everything could be strengthened by 2 times, and this was only the first level. Since there was a doubling even for taking pills, Mark thought that if he took 1 pill, it would count as if he had taken 2. But suddenly he stopped and thought, this mode consumed 1 point of madness per minute, and Mark only had 5. He was brought back to the world by the cries of his friend, who was trying to call the dead boy. Turning to Mark, he angrily called the guy a murderer. But Mark said that if he had not been attacked, the outcome would have been different. At that moment, Kylie appeared and asked what was going on. The girls were horrified when they saw that someone had died. Then all eyes were on the dead guy. Suddenly someone spoke and asked Kylie what happened. It was the second elder from the Heavenly Spirit sect, Chuck. His student, who was standing behind Chuck, looked forward and was horrified. With lightning speed, he rushed towards the dead guy. It turned out that the murdered man was his brother. Turning to Mark, he was angry that the boy had deprived him of his brother. But Mark replied that they wanted to take his valuable thing, so he simply fought back. But suddenly another guy, a friend of the murdered man, replied that it was a setup and they weren't trying to take anything. Another one also picked up and replied that they were just walking, and Mark started hitting them. Interrupting them, Chuck turned to Kylie and asked how their students could dare to do something so vile. Chuck continued that they wanted to extend the relationship between their families, but their students were getting hurt simply by walking into someone else's territory. Kylie crossed her arms and asked what he was getting at. The brother of the murdered man was outraged and therefore demanded a duel to the death with Mark. Chuck agreed, considering it a fair decision since his students had not broken the rules here. He believed that such a thing could not be overlooked, so he asked Kylie for permission to hold a fair fight. But she said that Mark was not on the short list, so they would have to choose another student. But Chuck didn't care whether Mark was part of that group or not, because he was challenged to a duel by the authority of their sect. But Kylie replied that they could choose anyone but him. Mark heard everyone start to say that he was just making unnecessary noise, and if he was forced to fight and he lost, the castle's authority would fall. Chuck wasn't surprised that Kylie didn't want Mark to be left out of the fight because he lacked chi blood. But even if he didn't have enough blood, he committed a crime, so Chuck wanted justice. At that moment, Kylie interrupted his speech. Chuck asked what she was doing and if she was looking for a war over such a moron. Kylie replied that if Mark was a loser, the 3 lying on the ground were even worse. Chuck responded that this slap was disrespectful to him and his clan. He wanted Mark to answer for his actions, since he killed one of their people. Kylie answered with confidence that Mark would never have attacked without a reason, and it was all because of their thieving students. At that moment, the atmosphere and aura around began to heat up, and even Mark felt it. The girls behind Kylie also drew their weapons. Seeing this, the disciples of the sect did the same. But suddenly Mark loudly said that he accepted the challenge and would fight on behalf of their castle. The girls were surprised when they heard this. Suddenly he saw a message that gave him a new task, to defeat his opponent. However, he was only glad of the sudden assignment. And for completing the mission, he was also given several awards. He thought that the experience reward would be especially useful to him, but the weapons seemed of low quality. The weapons and treasures varied in quality, but Mark was reassured that this was only the beginning. He understood that he shouldn't expect too much in the beginning. Hearing that Mark had agreed, Chuck thought that the castle lord should have no complaints. Then Kylie approached Mark and asked him not to talk nonsense. But Mark asked to be allowed to solve the problem himself. Otherwise, he is not worthy of being under her protection. He promised that he would bring them victory in this fight. Then Kylie gave her consent to this. Chuck said that then they would meet in 2 weeks and decide who would live and who would not. Mark replied that he agreed, but the rest of the battles would have to be conducted according to the standard rules. Chuck replied that since they held a grudge, the battle would only be to the death for Mark. As he was leaving, one of the sect's disciples slapped Mark on the back of the head. Finally, he told the guy to prepare a coffin and wait for his death. Afterwards, Kylie told everyone to get back to their business. The girls were angry about what had happened, because now everything depended only on Mark. Meanwhile, Kylie wanted to talk to Mark. Kylie asked him to survive even if he lost, and she would take care of the rest. With a smile, Mark asked if she believed in him. Hearing this, Kylie was surprised for a moment, and then she sighed and replied that she believed. But she only asked to make sure that he would not harm himself. Mark asked her not to worry about him and to let the guy be stubborn at least this time. After all, he didn't want Kylie to be judged and offended because of him. When Kylie heard this, she felt embarrassed. But she turned away and asked what he was talking about and called him baby. Then she started crying, and Mark began to wipe away her tears. And Mark said that he could even call her sister, not aunt, because she was not much older. But then Kylie hit him on the head and called him rude. Looking into the system, Mark wanted to see how good the things he could get from there were. He was surprised that he only gained many good skills after reaching level 5. And then I decided to try my luck in the lottery. He immediately noticed that few skills were given there, and accordingly, the chance of obtaining them was lower. And since he was participating for the first time, he was given 3 free attempts. When he started testing his luck, he hoped that he would get a divine ability, but he got a weapon. But Mark was still happy, because weapons are also good. What he received were ice gauntlets. Looking at them, he immediately thought that these were mittens, not gloves. The item had good attributes, but its quality was average. But Mark decided to leave them, because the gloves could be improved. To improve, he needed points, and luckily Mark could easily earn them. He also needed insanity points, which apparently could only be obtained by killing someone. This made Mark think that such madness was impossible. Then he decided to play the lottery again. But the lottery required 1,000 insanity points to participate, so Mark abandoned that idea as well. Mark knew that his opponent was much stronger, so now he needed to level up. Night fell soon after, but Mark did not sleep. Sitting on the floor, he looked somewhere ahead and waited for the moment. Soon he left his room and secretly headed somewhere outside the castle. Now he could move quickly and cover great distances. Having arrived at the right place, he decided to get down to business straight away. He found himself in a wolf's den. Mark thought it had been a long time since he had been here, but judging by his memories, he saw this for the first time, and the real owner of his body wanted to borrow the wolf essence and improve his blood. But he was weak compared to the wolves and almost died here. But now Mark understood that everything would turn out differently. Swinging his spear, he immediately hit the wolf that rushed at him. But then 2 wolves approached him from behind. Mark managed to react and threw them away from himself. And then he decided to try one of the techniques he had recently received. The first wolf he came across became his test subject. But Mark didn't stop there and wanted to try something else on the wolf. The star absorption technique immediately dealt critical damage to the wolf. Having gained experience for killing the wolf, Mark grabbed the next one. And he did this several more times with the wolves. Then Mark became convinced that the absorption technique absorbed other people's chi and gave him experience. Realizing this, he decided to continue his hunt. With a powerful attack, Mark attacked several wolves at once. Then he felt that energy filled his body and his steps became lighter and faster. He chuckled at the thought that this was how the cultivators felt. There were still a lot of wolves left, and Mark decided to try out the ice gloves. Mark, putting his glove forward, ran towards the wolves. A powerful attack attacked many wolves again. Because of the powerful attack, he thought the gauntlets were simply amazing. Each wolf gave 50 experience points, so Mark decided to use his advantage. By opening a 10-fold experience card, Mark provoked the wolves to attack. Then they rushed at each other. After some time, Mark ran out of steam. At that point, all the wolves had died, and he had reached level 6. But suddenly he heard a wolf howl and looked back. It seemed as if the leader of the wolves stood before him. The wolf looked furious, and Mark received a new task: to kill the wolf. As a reward, he would be allowed to summon a wolf as a mount, and Mark found this strange. But he immediately thought that he had to complete this task. At that moment, the wolf growled angrily and prepared for battle. He rushed at Mark, and it turned out that he was several times larger than the guy. 2 weeks later, everyone was waiting for the fight to begin. However, Mark did not show up, and this began to anger Chuck. The man said that if the guy didn't show up, things wouldn't end like last time. The guy next to him asked how he could avenge his brother if Mark had run away. But Kylie asked them to wait, because Mark wasn't going to run away. But Chuck was sure that Mark had fled out of fear of death. But Kylie wasn't surprised, because this sect was initially looking for conflict with them. Chuck wanted to explain what would happen to their castle if Mark did escape. But suddenly he heard a voice that asked why he would run away. Then everyone turned to Mark, who had come as he had promised, and he asked if they were ready for battle. All the girls also thought that Mark had run away, but he was in front of them. Looking at him and noticing that the guy was dirty, they thought that he had been hiding in the mountains for several days. However, despite this, there was a feeling that Mark had changed. Looking at his opponent, the guy said that at least Mark was not a coward. When everyone had gathered, Chuck asked for permission to begin the fight. The girls didn't understand why Mark came back because he was going to lose anyway. Chuck was also sure that Mark would lose, so he was happy. Then they said that the winner who wins 3 out of 5 rounds will get a place in the ancient ruins. Chuck asked who would fight in the first round for the castle. Mark replied that of course it would be him. Then Kylie approached him and asked him to admit defeat if he suddenly couldn't fight. But Mark told her that he would not allow anyone to humiliate him anymore. He turned away from her and started to walk away, leaving Kylie confused. Chuck told his student that he knew what he had to do. Chuck was glad that thanks to Mark, he had the opportunity to humiliate the castle and get a place in the ruins. One could admit defeat by leaving the arena. But Mark was not going to be allowed to leave here alive. But Mark only provoked his opponent, wanting to see what he could do. Rushing at Mark, the boy demanded that he ask his dead brother for forgiveness. When the enemy approached him, Mark did not react in any way, and Kylie was ready to intervene if Mark was in any danger. But Chuck understood that she wouldn't have time to intervene, and Mark would die. At that moment, the guy's hand was already at Mark's neck. However, he easily intercepted his opponent's hand. And then he used the star absorption technique. Seeing this, Chuck indignantly asked what kind of technology it was. The enemy immediately began to feel his energy leaving his body. Then he shouted for Mark to let him go. However, Mark looked at him with a sly smile and continued to take away someone else's energy. At that moment, the enemy had to take out a hidden knife. Kylie immediately noticed the poisoned blade. However, Chuck prevented her from reaching the arena. He said Kylie had no right to interfere. However, this only angered Kylie and she demanded that Chuck move away. At that moment, everyone heard the scream of the guy who had been stabbed. Immediately after this, Mark struck an opponent who was not much different from his brother. Then Chuck rushed to his student. Bending over the boy, he trembled when he realized that the boy was showing no signs of life. Then Mark got more experience and 1 healing pill. The girls from the castle could not believe that Mark had become so strong and did not recognize him at all. And Kylie thought that Mark's abilities should now be at level 7 or 8. And Chuck only now realized that Mark was not a scum if he was able to kill his opponent. Mark replied that both brothers were idiots and that they died like dogs. But they got what they deserved. Hearing this, Chuck became outraged and thought that Mark should not be left alive. Meanwhile, Mark was declared the first winner of the round. Kylie breathed a sigh of relief and said that Mark could now come down. But Chuck stopped them because Mark killed a disciple of their sect. And if he won, he had to move on to the next round. But Kylie said that they just want to kill Mark. And since he won, there is no point in fighting further. Then she turned to Mark and asked him to come down from the arena. But Mark refused and asked to be allowed to prove to her that she was not mistaken in her decision to defend him. In fact, Kylie had never seen Mark like this before. She didn't understand what he had to go through to change in such a short time. Chuck then chose the next student to fight. The opponent told Mark that his movements were strong, but rough and predictable. But the guy said that if Mark could withstand 3 of his blows, the guy would admit his defeat. Mark thanked him for this, but told his opponent that he was naive to think he could defeat the guy with just 3 blows. And after that, Mark said that he could handle the guy in 1 blow. Chuck thought that Mark considered himself invincible only because he had already won once. At that moment, the enemy made his first move. Kylie immediately recognized the technique he used, and Mark just grinned when he saw this. He elbowed the guy and said it was too easy. But it turned out that upon contact, the guy began to dissolve, and the enemy told Mark that he had only touched an illusion. Mark turned around and tried to attack him again. But this again turned out to be an illusion, and it began to anger Mark. Having attacked Mark from above, the enemy was going to finish off the guy. But Mark noticed him approaching and managed to turn around. The girls were worried about Mark and no longer believed that he would somehow get out of the trap. Only Chuck enjoyed the fact that the guy was about to fall. However, it turned out that Mark easily stopped the enemy's attack. Seeing this, Chuck was surprised that Mark knew their clan's technique. However, this did not particularly faze the enemy, and he continued to harass Mark. For him, Mark still remained a weakling whom he wanted to trample. But Mark replied that he didn't care about their skills. He just wanted to get to the enemy. Then he decided to use the star absorption technique again. As soon as he did this, the enemy felt strange. The others did not understand why Mark's enemy's aura began to noticeably weaken. Chuck guessed that Mark was using some skill, so he told his student to get rid of the annoying guy. However, at that moment, the guy didn't even have the strength to stand. With a grin, Mark asked his opponent if his legs were failing him. With his last strength, the enemy shouted for Mark to let him go. He didn't expect that he would ever find himself in such a state and lose to a loser. But he didn't want to lose and wanted to take the guy with him by any means necessary. At that moment, everyone saw a blinding light appear in the arena. Seeing this, Kylie began to worry about Mark. When the lights went out, the arena was filled with smoke. Chuck was glad they won, but it was still sad that they had to sacrifice good students. At that moment, Mark appeared in the arena and said that it was really sad that his opponent died. Chuck was shocked when he saw this. Mark was only saved by the fact that he managed to take a healing pill, and now he has received new rewards for defeating his opponent. Mark's victory delighted the girls, and now they were rooting for Mark. Kylie also looked at Mark with relief and pride, and seeing this, he smiled at his aunt. But suddenly he heard someone calling him. Chuck was unhappy that Mark used demonic skills in the fight. Mark replied that of course they would present everything in a favorable light for themselves. But in the first round, the opponent died because of his own poisoned knife. And this time the enemy used the pill to kill himself. Hearing this, Chuck was confused and didn't know what to answer. Mark told them to keep their threats to themselves and send their last man to fight. But Kylie said that everything was fine now and the guy should leave the last thing to them. But Chuck said that Mark had to fight since he was staying for the last round. But Kylie intervened and said that this time someone else would come out who didn't break the rules. For a moment there was silence in the arena. But Chuck finally said that it was Mark's choice to fight, and if he won now, Chuck would give the guy a subversive pill. Hearing this, everyone realized that Chuck really wanted Mark to fight. Having heard about such a reward, Mark could not refuse. Chuck thought with a grin that the stupid guy was going to die today anyway. Kylie wanted to say something, but Mark asked her not to worry. At that moment, Chuck was talking to the student who was supposed to fight this time, and he promised that if the man killed Mark, Chuck would solve all his problems. Entering the arena, the man promised to take revenge on the guy for killing his comrades. The man's spear appeared to weigh more than 600 kilograms. This made Kylie think that Chuck had planned everything in advance. Meanwhile, the man said that his honor did not allow him to fight an unarmed man, so he gave Mark a chance to leave the battlefield. But Mark only said that the enemy's weapon looked impressive. Kylie suddenly asked what kind of weapon Mark needed, but the guy took out his gun and repeated again that everything was fine. When Chuck saw Mark's weapon, he didn't understand how it was any different from hand-to-hand combat. Kylie also didn't understand how Mark was going to use this weapon. The enemy told Mark that he had brought about his own death. As soon as the battle began, Mark was surrounded by spears that appeared from underground. Instantly, the man began to look very furious, and Kylie realized that he had swallowed a rabies pill and told Mark to get out of there. But at that moment, Mark was almost overtaken by an enemy spear. Despite this, there was a smug grin on his face. He used Cloud Step, which surprised his opponent. Despite this, he still struck. Looking down, he saw that his feet were frozen to the ground. The ice began to spread rapidly throughout his body. As soon as the man froze, cracks began to appear in the ice, and after a few moments it completely disintegrated, and Mark said loudly that now victory was his. Seeing this, all the spectators were surprised. Chuck was the most surprised, because Mark knew their secret techniques. But at that moment, everyone joyfully declared Mark the winner. Then Mark received a message that he had killed an elite student. As a reward, he began to receive experience, gold, and items. After looking through all the awards, Mark thought that this would be enough for him for a while. After looking through the items, he also realized that he could open one box with gifts. At that moment, Kylie came up to him and told Chuck that Mark was the winner. Hearing this, the sect was upset, but they could not object. Mark asked with a grin if Chuck was going to act like someone who couldn't lose gracefully. But Chuck asked how Mark learned their secret techniques. Mark replied that he had learned them simply by observing their students. But this answer outraged Chuck. Then Kylie intervened again and reminded them that they had lost, so they shouldn't be rude. Hearing this, the man was stupefied for a moment, and then he casually threw the promised pill and told everyone to come back. When the box hit the ground, it opened and a pill fell out. Kylie and Mark noticed her right away. The guy sighed heavily and thought that this was not the end, but suddenly he wondered what he could get for killing this old man. Afterwards, Kylie talked to Mark and said that his cultivation should be at the highest level. But Mark replied that it was already much higher. Just recently, he couldn't cultivate, so Kylie asked what was going on with the guy. Mark lied that he had met an expert a few days ago who helped him with cultivation. He assumed that the expert had been sent by his father, but the man hadn't talked about anything other than cultivation. Kylie admitted that she was constantly worried about Mark because she thought he didn't have enough strength. Mark told her that he just wanted to surprise her. After this conversation, they returned home, and Mark had time to open the box of gifts. Looking ahead, he addressed the system. Instantly, all the necessary windows appeared in front of him. He clicked on the box, eager to find out what he would get this time. It turns out that Mark was given all the professional skills. Mark accepted them immediately because he understood that they could all help him. Besides, he judged that they were all quite good. Previously, they had to look for blacksmiths and other workers, but now there will be no need for this. He was also given one chance to spin the wheel of fortune. He immediately decided to spin the wheel, anticipating what he would get this time. Mark hoped to obtain a divine ability, and he was able to do so. The aura of luck increased his luck by 5 times for every point of insanity every second. Mark thought it was like finding money by accident on the street. He decided to go out and try out this ability, but in the end, he only used up his insanity points. Suddenly, he met a girl on the street. Approaching Mark, she informed him that she had been asked to inform Mark that he should report to the main chamber tomorrow morning. However, as she walked, she suddenly tripped over her own foot and fell into Mark's arms. This caused a moment of awkwardness between them, but the girl immediately pulled away and apologized. Looking at her, Mark thought that this was considered good luck. The next morning, as he was supposed to, Mark came to the main chamber. There he saw that everyone was gathered and waiting for him. Kylie told everyone that she had decided to make Mark an apprentice to their castle. Hearing this, Mark was a little surprised but remained silent. But one girl immediately began to get indignant and say that they would be wasting resources. Kylie replied that there were 6 months left before the ruins opened, and by that time Mark would meet the requirements. Hearing this, the girl was surprised that Mark had broken through the spirit refinement stage. Kylie understood that the elder wanted her apprentice to have this opportunity, but Mark fought 3 battles, putting his life on the line. And since he won thanks to his strength, the elder was asked not to interfere with the guy. Kylie expressed her position that the place in the ruins should belong to Mark. She asked if there were any objections, but no one else did. She approached Mark and said that when he entered the ruins, he would have many opportunities for cultivation. Mark saw messages that he had activated the main mission, but seeing the reward, he thought the difficulty must be high. Kylie asked how they were doing with the blacksmiths and weapons, but the elder said that the blacksmith was currently resting, but they were ready to invite him. Kylie promised that the blacksmith would make Mark a good weapon. Mark didn't argue, even though he knew he already had a good weapon. When the blacksmith arrived, he was immediately invited to sit down. But it felt as if the man was weaker in cultivation than the others present. Kylie said they needed 3 spirit rank weapons and asked for a price. The man said that such a weapon is not simple and the price for it is high. He continued that he would forge the weapon if his 3 conditions were met. He wanted his student to be allowed to become a follower of the castle, as well as money for materials. However, the amount of money he demanded was very large, and Kylie began to doubt it. Despite her request, the man did not want to lower the price. She had to agree and asked to name the last condition. The blacksmith said that if one of the girls was allowed to be his Tao companion, he would give the weapon for free. And then he said that he fell in love with the girl who was standing next to him. Hearing this, she immediately moved away from the blacksmith and approached Mark. Mark didn't want the girl to be forced to agree against her will. One of the elders supported the idea since the girl's skills were low, and by marrying her off, they would receive weapons for free. But the girl replied that she did not want to get married. The blacksmith said that if she married him, the castle would be able to use many resources. Despite this, the girl still refused. But this angered the blacksmith, and he said that then the castle would have to look for someone else to forge items. Hearing this, Kylie decided to drive the blacksmith away. Kylie said they had previously treated him with respect, but now he was making fun of her student. But the man became indignant again, thinking that they had no manners. The elder became angry with the student and asked what she was thinking about. The girl said that by marrying the blacksmith, the apprentice could get everything she wanted. But Mark intervened and said that if the girl did not agree, then there was nothing to discuss. And then he added that he could easily forge a weapon himself. But Kylie believed that Mark would not succeed in this even by a miracle. The blacksmith, hearing this, chuckled at the guy's self-confidence. Kylie heard the blacksmith mocking the boy now, not the apprentice. But Mark asked what if he could really forge a weapon. The blacksmith said that he would then give Mark his sword, and he added that he would walk on his hands. But if Mark fails, the girl will still have to marry the blacksmith. But Mark said that he would not use the girl as a subject for an argument, and if he lost, he would cut off his own hand. Afterwards, Mark asked to prepare all the materials so that he could do everything. Then he saw messages about a new assignment. But Kylie was angry and asked Mark to ask the blacksmith for forgiveness. Mark repeated that the girl was not a thing, and he suggested that his aunt marry the blacksmith herself. The whole situation brought tears to the student's eyes. But afterward, Kylie agreed to take Mark to the workshop. Mark asked her if she believed in him, and the girl replied that she believed it, because they were family. Soon he was escorted to the workshop, where everything he needed was available. Mark replied that this would be enough and he would not be mistaken. The blacksmith thought that the guy was very self-confident, because even he himself was not sure that he could forge a good weapon. Meanwhile, Kylie asked Mark to make a long sword. The flames inside the oven were normal, so Mark was careful. Watching him, the blacksmith was sure that the guy was bluffing. The elder tried to intervene, because if Mark failed, they would waste the materials. But Kylie decided to take responsibility. And when the student said that she could simply marry the blacksmith, Kylie told her to believe in Mark. Meanwhile, the guy decided to get down to business. Almost simultaneously, he threw the materials into the fire. As soon as he did this, a strong flame broke out inside. And from the strong explosion, everyone tensed up. But suddenly a sword flew out of the oven and plunged into the floor. When the task was completed, Mark was given a reward. Afterwards, the boy asked the blacksmith to check the sword for quality. But Kylie got ahead of him and confirmed that the sword was of good quality. The blacksmith said he wouldn't check it. He was outraged that he had been tricked into making a bet, while before this they had pretended that the guy did not know how to do magic. But Mark said with a grin that he didn't say he didn't know how to make weapons. The blacksmith said that he lost the bet, but it was Mark's trap. Mark replied that if the blacksmith had not been so pushy, there would have been no need to intervene. And even if there were only girls in the castle, they were the owners, not the blacksmith. Mark said that the girls had the right to choose, and then drove the blacksmith away. But he replied that the boy was still wet behind the ears, so he shouldn't force his elders to do anything. And Kylie decided she could do it. She said that Mark was betting his hand, and the blacksmith his weapon. But the blacksmith did not want to argue and tried to simply leave. This made Mark angry, and then he kicked the man. Unable to withstand the blow, he literally flew out of the palace. The elder thought that they had gone too far, because the blacksmith could have brought people here. Although Mark wanted to take responsibility, the girl said that the blacksmith was well known. Mark decided to forge more weapons so that everyone could see the difference between his skills and the blacksmith's skills. Without waiting for a reaction, Mark got down to business. In his hands, he was able to form a clod of mana, and with its help, he lit an unusual fire. Kylie couldn't believe Mark had gotten his hands on such a flame. Now that Mark has the immortal flame, things are getting better for him. This time, he got a spiritual weapon of average quality. Mark asked the elders to judge whether he was comparable to the blacksmith. All but one admitted that the quality of the sword was good, and Mark decided to forge until everyone had a spiritual weapon. Suddenly, Mark received a new assignment. This made him wonder how his aunt felt about him now, and then he saw that a line appeared above her head, which showed the person's disposition towards Mark. Seeing the score ratio, Mark knew that his aunt loved him very much, and upon learning this, he was very happy. After some time, all the materials ran out. Then Mark said that if there were herbs, he could make pills. However, it turned out that they did not have any spiritual herbs at the moment. Because of this, Kylie decided to send someone to buy them. And when Mark suggested that he buy them himself, Kylie agreed. However, she insisted that Mark be accompanied by 2 students. Mark greeted them, but it turned out that they didn't treat Mark very well. Finally, Auntie asked Mark to take a ring that would allow him to store things inside, and then he promised to return as soon as they got everything. Mark was informed that they were heading to the nearest major city. Mark hoped that they wouldn't run into a blacksmith in this city. Soon, they arrived in a city that caused delight. But then someone was rushing down the road at full speed. Because of that carriage, everyone ran in different directions. Many immediately recognized the carriage of the winged sect. People were asked to step aside if they did not want to die. But there were also those who were angry that the sect had broken into the city. The girls were talking about how much power this clan had. Mark became interested in this sect. That cart was a weapon they personally created. Suddenly, he was given a task in which he had to defeat the disciples of that sect. But Mark found it strange that the system was giving out random tasks. If he activated the luck aura, he thought he would get more rewards. Soon, Mark was brought to the Hall of the Heavenly Phoenix. There was some noise inside due to trading. The girl was angry that she was offered too little money for her goods. But the man grabbed her roughly and said that he was giving her more than she deserved. The girl believed that she was being deceived and demanded that the money be returned. Mark's companion said that this always happens here, but Mark still wanted to intervene. The girl tried to escape from the man's grip, and she managed to bite the man hard. But this made him angry, and he decided to hit her. When he swung, she got scared. But because the blow did not come, she slowly opened her eyes. It turned out that Mark managed to intercept the hand, and he asked if the man was ashamed to abuse a child. But he replied that it was none of Mark's business and decided to beat the guy up too. Noticing this, the girl tried to intervene. Because of this, the blow was directed at her. But before the man could strike, Mark struck first. Having received a strong slap, he flew back. Angered, he asked Mark if the guy knew who was in front of him. Mark said he didn't know, but if the man didn't return the money to the child, he would lose his teeth. Realizing that it was a cultivator in front of him, the man immediately fell to the ground. Afterwards, he obediently gave the silver to the girl and ran away in fear. Because of this, Mark received favor from Eliza. As a token of gratitude, she wanted to give silver to Mark. The girl couldn't give more because she still had to feed her younger brother. Mark asked her to keep it for himself and asked if she would like to join their castle. The girl replied that her skills were poor and she was unlikely to suit them. Then Mark asked the students if the girl would be suitable if he personally vouched for her. The girl replied that attracting one person would not be a problem. Afterwards, Mark turned to Eliza and said that she could go with them, but the girl refused because she couldn't leave her brother. Mark received another task, but he was promised some prestige points as a reward. And then he decided to check his characteristics. Then he realized that good deeds increase his prestige. And then he told Eliza that she could take her brother too. Mark warned that they needed to buy some things first. Eliza said she would wait outside, as people from the slums were forbidden to go inside. But then Mark took her hand, and he said that she would go in with them and no one would stop her. But at that moment, someone reached out to the girl, and he roughly pushed her back so hard that she flew several meters away. The man reminded her that people from the slums were not allowed to enter. Then Mark said that he would conduct it himself. Frightened by the cultivator, the man helped Eliza to stand up, and then he escorted them inside, and Mark decided to spare this man. Once inside, Eliza was delighted. She looked at the objects inside with surprise. Mark noticed that she was interested in the pill and asked why she needed it. The girl replied that her younger brother had been poisoned and that a pill could help. Then Mark agreed to help her brother. But their conversation was interrupted by a displeased voice. The man asked who allowed the commoner to enter here. Mark recognized their blacksmith, and then the man was surprised to see the boy. Mark asked why they couldn't be here. Hearing this, the man tensed up, and then he decided to call security so that they would throw the girl out. When the guard came, he told us to get rid of the girl. The security guard told the girl to leave or she would be thrown out. Mark wasn't surprised that the blacksmith was respected here, but he asked why everyone assumed the girl came from the slums. And the man replied that if she couldn't afford even a cheap thing, she didn't belong here. But suddenly Mark put an object into her hands. Then the guard waited for the blacksmith's instructions. But he still insisted that Eliza be kicked out. Because of this scandal, the girl began to tremble. Mark intervened and said that she was better than the people who wore expensive clothes. Because of this noise, people came running and began to watch. Finally, the man who ran the establishment arrived. Seeing the people, he guessed which palace they came from. One of the girls spoke up and said that they, as guests, should be shown respect. The man replied that then they shouldn't quarrel with each other. But the blacksmith said that if those people were allowed to stay, he would leave the hall. Because of this, the owner thought that he should not insult the blacksmith. And then he asked the guests to leave. Mark stopped the girl who was indignant and said that they would not deal with such a place. And then he asked the owner to remember his choice. Finally, the blacksmith told them not to even come back here. When they were outside, Eliza apologized to everyone. But Mark was a little surprised by this, and he said that what happened had nothing to do with her. Instead, he decided to go somewhere else. When they came to another place, I asked if they collected artifacts, and then he said that he would like to sell spiritual weapons. Mark wanted those who kicked him out to regret their choice. Having learned about this, the servant decided to call the pavilion master. While the noise inside arose, Mark received a new task: to help this pavilion suppress those who expelled Mark. Mark was pleased that the tasks only increased. Then finally, the master of this place appeared. Appearing before them, the girl introduced herself by name, and she immediately noticed the spiritual weapon. And I immediately realized that they were all of average quality. The girl thought that if she worked with Mark, she would get great benefits. She asked if Mark would sell them, and Mark replied that not quite, because if he was given the materials, he would make even more. But his only condition was that the weapons would be sold cheaper than the Heavenly Phoenix Hall. The girl immediately realized that Mark was angry with them, and then she said that she would accept the offer. Meanwhile, the blacksmith said that Mark's castle had wrongly ruined its relationship with their blacksmith. But someone interrupted their conversation. The one who came running reported that the Heavenly Rain Hall was selling spiritual weapons cheaper than them. The men were surprised when they heard this. The master considered that this price was too low, and the guy continued that the seller offered the price, and he assumed it was the one they had recently kicked out. The master wondered why they were selling weapons if they didn't have a blacksmith. He began to suspect that they were missing something. The blacksmith only hoped that the boy would return to his palace as quickly as possible. Then suddenly the master ordered to go and buy all the weapons. This caused a noise in the street. But over time, the master began to get angry that the weapons remained on sale. He began to suspect something bad. Meanwhile, things were going well at the Heavenly Rain Hall. The girls greeted their customers with smiles. The master thought that anyone could fail. But Mark never failed. Meanwhile, Mark's forging skills increased to an intermediate level. Now the success rate for forging advanced weapons was 50%. Soon, Eliza brought Mark to her brother. First, Mark decided to examine his body. He suggested that the boy had been bitten by a snake and that the poison had now mixed with his blood. Seeing his sister, the boy began to tell what had happened to him. And when Eliza started crying, Mark asked her not to worry. And then he added that a pill would help, but there was a way to get rid of the poison faster. Eliza tensed when she saw the fire, and she suggested that with its help, Mark would disperse the poison. Soon, the poisonous toxins in the boy's body broke down. Mark was glad that the poison was not powerful, otherwise the boy would have already died. The boy told his sister that he felt better now. Afterwards, Eliza thanked Mark and said that she was ready to serve him all her life. With this, Mark completed the task. The girl suggested that Mark was one of the alchemists. Turning to her, Mark asked the master for a room where the children could stay. Soon, they were taken to a room, and Mark continued to dig into the system, and he learned that prestige points influenced his success. Suddenly, the master was informed that another temple was selling weapons even cheaper, and she was also offered to reduce the price. But she considered it pointless to lower the price a little, and Mark suggested reducing it significantly. She still had doubts, and Mark asked her to leave everything to him. After all, he wanted their customers back. If Mark could handle everything, he was offered half of the profits. First, he decided to raise the level of success and activated luck with crazy mode. This allowed his success rate to rise to 100%. Meanwhile, the master and Eliza waited outside, and suddenly Mark appeared with a new weapon. In front of him was an item of advanced quality. When the girls saw this, they couldn't believe their eyes. Because of this whole situation, the master was starting to get tired, and the blacksmith suddenly said that perhaps someone was following them. But the master told him not to talk nonsense. Then it was reported that another temple had begun selling weapons of superior quality. This surprised everyone. The master realized that the clients were being deliberately set against them. The envoy also reported who exactly sold the weapons. Having heard about Mark, the master became angry. When the item broke, the blacksmith began to panic. After all, he couldn't create the same weapon. They soon reported how many advanced weapons they would sell. Then the master's anger shifted to the blacksmith. After all, it was he who provoked that guy, and he was denied service. The blacksmith had to leave the hall, but the master understood that he could only ask God for help. But Mark's insolence angered him. Meanwhile, the blacksmith did not want to stand aside, but he believed that he was forced to do it. At that time, Mark continued to create weapons. However, he was already too exhausted. Because of this, the master began to worry about him, and she asked Mark to rest. But Mark said there was no need for gratitude, because they helped each other. Although he didn't expect that forging would increase his level faster, after some time he studied the system again. But suddenly I heard a sound, and then he received notifications about the danger. Someone immediately approached him, but Mark was able to defend himself and push the man away, and his armor helped him with this. The attacker was taken aback by the powerful blow. He also experienced severe pain after the blow, but he immediately looked angrily at Mark. He only asked who sent the guy. At first, he didn't want to answer, and then he pulled out a knife. Mark noticed him, so he was able to dodge. At the same time, he froze the enemy and activated the luck skill before attacking. Finally, he told the guy that he would become experience points for him. Immediately after that, he broke the ice. At the same moment, he again received rewards from the system. After checking them, he thought the rewards were good, but he was upset that the weapons obtained for killing monsters could not be upgraded. But I was glad that they were of good quality. Mark immediately thought that the killer could have been sent by the blacksmith. And then suddenly I noticed something. Among the ice, he discovered a ring. The guy immediately decided that it belonged to the killer. And then he saw what was in the ring. And in order to find out who sent the killer to him, Mark decided to go to that temple. Before going outside, he decided to activate the cloak. When Mark found himself outside, a blacksmith was waiting near the palace. Immediately noticing him, the guy cast a keen glance at the man. The blacksmith was angry that the assassin, who was from the elite, was taking so long to complete his task. Seeing the blacksmith, Mark was not surprised that it was he who sent the killer. He was offered the task of killing a blacksmith, and without thinking twice, he accepted it. He moved towards the man with lightning speed. But he didn't even notice that someone had approached him. Noticing the strange aura, the man finally turned around. However, he did not see anyone behind him. But even so, the strange feeling did not cease to leave him. Because of this, he decided to leave. But Mark was watching the man. Seeing all the information about the man, including his low cultivation level, Mark chuckled. And at the same time, he threw his sword at the man. Then he appeared before the blacksmith and said that his moment of death had come. The man recognized Mark, but didn't have time to react and simply fell down dead. As a reward for completing the task, Mark began to receive various awards. While this was happening, he took a container of liquid and used it. Mark found it on the killer, which was apparently intended to get rid of evidence. Afterwards, Mark decided to be more careful, because the existence of people like the blacksmith could harm him. When the master arrived, Mark calmly told that he had destroyed the killer. And since all the tasks here were completed, Mark decided to return to avoid further problems. The master decided to give Mark more profit since he had caused trouble here. Mark agreed, although he said that the guards would not have been able to stop the killer. But the girl was grateful to him for helping their hall become more famous. Mark warned that he wanted to leave tomorrow and decided to leave. In the morning, when Mark was about to leave, everyone saw him off. But suddenly they learned that the Heavenly Phoenix Hall was holding an auction. They were selling good weapons, and a lot of people had already gathered there. They also heard from the crowd that someone was saying that all weapons except those made by the God Clan were fake. Master never thought that the Heavenly Phoenix could ask for help from that clan. But Mark, hearing about this, thought about something. The Master thought that Mark knew the creator of the God Clan, but the guy had only heard about him. The other girls were angry that the weapons Mark made were called fake. Suddenly a crowd rushed towards them, shouting that they wanted their money back. And they were angry that they had been deceived and sold low-quality weapons. Everyone, without exception, demanded that their money be returned. The master tried to calm them down and explain that their weapons were not fake. However, the crowd continued to insist on its own. Mark suddenly intervened and told them to return the people's money. The master decided not to argue with Mark and asked all the people to follow her. Meanwhile, Mark was thinking that it seemed like he couldn't leave and would have to go into the Heavenly Phoenix Hall. The master welcomed the guest who came to them. The girl asked him why they said that all weapons except their own were fake. Then the girl was told that they had examined the weapons from their hall. The follower of the God Clan's creator said that this weapon could be considered at most a medium-quality weapon. He believed that the weapon the girl was selling was too weak. Mark asked why they didn't test the weapons on each other then. He suggested testing whose weapon would be stronger, and he asked if they were ready to accept his challenge. The man cautiously asked the boy who he was, and Mark said that he was the one who created that spiritual weapon. Then the man looked at him appraisingly, and then he laughed, recognizing Mark, who couldn't even cultivate. He scoffed that trash like Mark thought he could create spiritual weapons. Mark simply replied that rumors should not be believed, and again suggested arranging a match. But the man was outraged that they spoke to him like that and replied that if they arranged a match, it would be one-on-one. Mark replied that since his weapon was being questioned, it was obvious that he would fight alone. Soon everyone was anticipating their duel. All the girls warned Mark that it would not be easy with such an opponent. But he only asked them not to worry about themselves. The enemy told Mark that he still hoped that the guy would turn out to be a real man. And then he pointed to the sword and said that it was the best weapon he had managed to make. And with him, he was going to prove that he was stronger. And Mark decided to use a heavy sword to slay his enemy. But the master warned them that this was a simple sparring match, not a life-and-death battle. The man thought he had nothing to worry about, as using a heavy sword against a light one was foolish. The audience also thought that Mark was foolish to choose such a sword. After attacking Mark, the man told him to blame himself for provoking the God Clan. But Mark didn't answer and silently blocked the blows. Although then he already understood that for the man this was a fight and he was trying to kill his opponent. Having parried the blow, Mark was able to push the man back, and the enemy was angered that the guy was able to block the attack. Enraged, in the heat of battle, he exclaimed that he would see how long Mark could hold out. However, Mark believed that he had not encountered such a strong opponent, and he admitted that the follower of the God Clan had upset him. Having said this, he rushed forward, and he exclaimed that now it was his turn to attack. His attacks were furious, but the man managed to block them. However, his sword was the first to give in, and cracks appeared on it. As soon as Mark noticed this, he decided to activate crazy mode. The wind rose around them, but the master calmly watched their battle. For a moment, the fighting stopped, and the man tried to catch his breath. At that moment, he looked at his sword, which was no longer suitable for fighting. Mark asked why his quality weapon fell apart and whose weapon was actually fake. The spectators who had been watching all this time now began to suspect the God Clan of lying. The man asked if Mark dared to hurt him. As he waited for an answer, his face was wrinkled with displeasure. And without waiting for an answer, he rushed at the guy again. However, Mark immediately noticed that the man had decided to attack. Reacting, he swung his weapon and completely shattered the man's spiritual weapon. The man's face twisted again in annoyance. Mark's strong blow threw him up, but the boy jumped towards him. In an instant, he was able to reach the man, and raising his sword above his head, he told the man to surrender. Then he struck with a blow that had deafening force. The master watched this and thought that although Mark was young, he could be called a genius and a talented person. Due to Mark's strong blow, the man's body even punched a hole in the ground. He chuckled and told the man that he had lost and that his weapon was no better. Hearing this, the man became angry and frowned. He gripped his sword tighter, refusing to accept his defeat. Getting up, he rushed towards Mark, who was standing calmly in place. The man was about to kill the guy by aiming a knife at his neck. However, Mark was faster and struck a stronger blow first. Having received a serious injury, the man was unable to stay on his feet and dropped his knife. Mark said the enemy refused to admit defeat and decided to use a sneak attack. But he added with a smile that the man hadn't even succeeded in doing that. All the spectators were shocked. They couldn't believe that Mark had won, much less killed a follower of the God Clan, which would certainly bring him trouble. However, Mark didn't care, because he successfully completed the mission and received rewards. Suddenly, he heard a voice behind him asking if Mark had really killed the man. Then the people decided to seize him and take him to the creator of the God Clan. The man understood that they had to take the killer to the God Clan because they were responsible for the guest in their domain. But everyone tensed up when he only grinned at Mark's attempt to grab him. He calmly said that they could try to do it. The master continued that if the boy did not give in, he would drag his own palace into this matter. Mark was outraged that if someone was trying to kill him, he couldn't do the same. The man warned that if the boy did not surrender, his palace would be destroyed by the creator of the clan of the God of War. But suddenly one girl intervened and asked if they could introduce the creator of the God Clan right now. The man heard that their castle had its own connections, and if something happened, they would not just watch. The master still insisted that they should follow him. The girl thought that if Mark followed them, he would definitely die at the hands of the creator of the God Clan. Suddenly, she was told that they too could not offend the creator of the God Clan. The pavilion master understood that if she stood up for Mark, she would be considered his assistant. Then she was going to apologize. However, someone else's speech interrupted her and surprised her. Mark said that from now on, he was no longer an outer disciple of his palace. He didn't want anyone else to get involved if the problem was him. A girl approached him and asked him not to act recklessly. The master got angry and said that they were all just fools. Afterwards, he ordered to seize the guy but leave him alive. Mark looked at the men approaching him and immediately realized that they were in the 4th stage of spiritual cleansing. But this did not frighten him, and he was ready to fight. And using the new equipment, he rushed into battle. He was able to strike the first blow instantly. He had a great aura of luck, so Mark noticed that he was being attacked from behind. Turning around, he managed to attack the man first, and then he continued to fight with the others. His attacks were powerful enough to break his opponent's weapons. When Mark killed the first of them, the system gave him rewards. Seeing the death of an ally, others were surprised. Then one of them forbade them to come closer. But before they could do anything, Mark had already rushed towards them, and again he killed one of them. Soon Mark received messages about new rewards, and that he had entered the 5th stage of spiritual purification. When everyone was defeated, he wondered if anyone else would want to try. The master who was watching this did not understand how the boy knew the techniques of the God Clan, and the girls noticed that Mark was now stronger than before. The master was angry that the guy was killing his subordinates and did not want to reveal his true power. Then he told Mark that the Heavenly Phoenix Hall would not spare him, and he asked Mark to show what the guy was capable of. But thanks to the system, Mark immediately noticed that the master was characterized as a boss. This didn't frighten him, it only provoked him, and then he joyfully rushed at the man. But he was angered by Mark's constant arrogance. Enraged, he used the 10,000 sword slashes technique, but Mark confidently blocked his blows. This made their fight more intense as no one was giving in. Their collision caused an explosion and Mark was thrown back. Noticing a whistle overhead, he looked up. And thanks to this, he was able to react and block the attack. But at that moment, the enemy began to oppress him, and the guy's body began to tremble. Unable to withstand the enemy's onslaught, Mark lost his sword. He fell to the ground with a crash, and a trickle of blood ran down the boy's hand. Seeing this, the girls began to worry about him. But when they wanted to intervene, Mark told them to stay away from him and not to interfere, because he was no longer a student of their castle. Coming from him, it didn't sound like a warning, but like a request. Because of this, the girls remained on the sidelines. Mark continued to stand on his feet and was told he was too stubborn. And now that Mark was left without a weapon, the man wanted to see how long the guy could remain arrogant. But to the man's surprise, Mark laughed, and he asked why he assumed that Mark didn't have any other weapons. Then suddenly ice mittens appeared on his hands. But the man thought that the guy was just crazy and was confident of his victory. Then he pounced on Mark. But at that moment, he suddenly froze and his face twisted. It turns out that with the help of the gauntlets, Mark easily stopped the sword. The guy said it was a great start to the absorption technique. And as soon as he said this, the system began sending him experience points. Having frozen the man's hand, Mark decided to throw him to the ground. And the next moment, he had already thrown his opponent down. The force of Mike's throw was so great that when he hit the ground, the man shattered it. Immediately after this, Mark himself went down to the man. The master wanted to be indignant that this was impossible, but he started coughing. Mark answered the man that nothing was impossible, and the master was simply weak. Then he prepared to deliver the finishing blow. In horror, the master asked to be allowed to leave. However, it was too late, and Mark had no intention of retreating. Seeing this, everyone was horrified. For killing a master, the system began to issue rewards again. Various artifacts and even techniques were given out. Mark was glad that he even managed to raise his level. Suddenly, people were surprised how a man could die so easily if he was at the 7th stage of spiritual purification. The pavilion master also couldn't believe that Mark was so strong. But suddenly she thought that the danger was not over yet. She told Mark that he had to get out of here before it was too late. Hearing this, Mark remained silent. Suddenly, he handed his ring to one of the girls, saying that he would handle his own battle. He also asked to return and tell the lord of the palace not to worry about him. Mark understood that if his aunt decided to protect him, it would only bring more problems to the palace. Then he made a dash and rushed forward. Suddenly, the girls heard a voice behind them addressing Mark. It turned out that the creator of the God Clan rushed after Mark. The girls thought that this was the end for Mark and that he would not be able to defeat such an opponent. Mark didn't expect that after killing one boss, he would immediately get the next one. But he understood that if he entered into battle now, he would lose. The creator rushed after the guy but lost him. However, the man was sure that Mark would not be able to escape. By detecting the aura, he was able to detect traces of Mark, and immediately after that he rushed after him. He was running at full speed but suddenly stopped abruptly, and then he frowned and looked ahead. Stopping, the man began to look around in search of Mark. He didn't understand how the guy could disappear so suddenly. Having said that it would be better for Mark to go out himself, the man broke through one of the walls. Afterwards, he decided to go inside. When he did this, Mark noticed the clan's creator. The man suddenly said that if Mark did not come out, he would grab the girls who came with him and throw them to the students for satisfaction. Mark kept his cool and continued to watch. Suddenly, he thought that now he had no choice, because he didn't want the girls to get hurt. Because of this, he used the mad pill and activated the crazy power mode. Noticing the increase in aura, the man thought that Mark was going to kill him. Reacting to the guy's attack, he dodged. However, Mark did not take his eyes off his opponent. The man pulled out his weapon and wanted to strike back. Mark immediately judged that the man's armor must be very strong. Then he decided to activate the extra effect of the heavenly god's armor. Their collision caused an explosion. The man was surprised when he noticed that Mark had blocked his attack. However, Mark could hardly bear it. Because of this, he had to take restorative pills. After taking them, he immediately felt a surge of strength. He activated his invisibility mode, which immediately surprised the enemy. He began to panic a little because he didn't feel Mark's presence at all. He was also surprised that even after a direct attack, Mark was fine. However, he believed that Mark would not be able to hide from him forever. Since he couldn't see Mark, he decided to attack in all directions. But Mark didn't care, and he even found a chance to attack. At that moment, the man felt it and was able to dodge. and when Mark passed by, he hit the guy in the back. When the man tried to attack him a second time, Mark had already dodged. But he quickly reacted and followed the guy's movements. Mark realized that the enemy was too strong and he would not be able to defeat him easily. Noticing that Mark was having a hard time, the man chuckled. Suddenly, a bright light appeared in front of Mark. It turned out that the clan's creator decided to attack him with a powerful attack. Mark noticed the attack and decided that he couldn't give up now. Then he was able to break through the enemy's attack and caught up with him in an instant. The man immediately recognized the sneak attack and decided that the guy was too naive. Because of this, Mark missed. And just like last time, he rushed past the man. Noticing that Mark had sped up, the man became angry. And he asked if Mark thought cheap tricks would help him. And then he decided to show the guy the real power of an expert from the creators of the God Clan. When Mark was faced with multiple blades, he realized that it was a hidden weapon. And he realized that he would not be able to dodge this attack. Mark was backed into a corner. And the next moment he was pierced through and dissolved. However, the man was confused because this should not have happened. At that moment, he noticed Mark flash in front of him. Mark rushed past him and shouted that the man would die today. Then the man felt a sharp pain. He was angry that Mark was able to penetrate his armor. But Mark was surprised that he thought his armor could withstand continuous attacks. The man suddenly said that if Mark killed him, the creators of the God Clan would never let him go. But Mark was ready to kill anyone who came to him. The man wanted to object. But at that moment, his body began to freeze. And Mark hit the ice block and broke it. After killing him, Mark completed the mission again and began receiving rewards. He received experience, gold, 1 chance in the lottery, and also a weapon. What pleased him most was that he had risen 2 levels, and one of the items received was a pear-colored pouring needle. Mark thought that this weapon was great, but it could only be used once. Immediately after this, he decided to leave that place. To make things easier, he summoned the king of the snow spirits. And at that very moment, a snow wolf appeared next to him. Having mounted it, the boy rushed forward. When night fell, they took refuge in a cave. Looking at the sleeping wolf, the boy thought that he should be safe now. While he had some free time, Mark decided to log into the system and check his status. Suddenly, he discovered a gift bag. Because Mark was in continuous combat, he completely forgot about this gift. And having received an experience card from there, Mark was delighted. He also gained the skill of the appraising eye, which could see detailed information about the target. Mark immediately decided to try it out. Having used it on the wolf, he was actually able to see all the detailed information. And then he decided to compare the wolf's strength with his own, which was tens of times greater. Mark was happy, because this way he could immediately escape from opponents who would be too strong. So Mark got a pill for 5,000 experience points from the lottery. He was upset because his prestige was too low. But suddenly I remembered that he had an aura of luck, and he became curious if it would work in the lottery. When the wheel started spinning, the boy relied on skill. However, some object fell out for him. Mark was upset and hoped that the item would have more than one use. And it turns out that Mark received 100 transformation masks. Having examined the mask, he grinned. Meanwhile, one man was angry because their plan didn't work. He was angry that his people were killed in the Heavenly Phoenix Hall. But one lord reported that the Heavenly Phoenix Hall also suffered losses. The master of the Boya clan's creator sect admitted that Mark seemed strange to him. The lord said that perhaps the guy was constantly being helped by someone, since he himself could not cultivate. And although Mark no longer considered himself a part of his palace, the God clan's side still suffered losses because of him. The master decided that they would capture Mark and kill him in front of his castle. He also wanted to take possession of the treasures that were in that castle. No one had dared to attack them before, but now he thought the time was right. Arriving at the place, Mark immediately recognized the mountain of the illusory beast. Mark believed that he could easily break through to the core condensation region. With this thought, he rushed forward, but soon someone blocked their way. But Mark only thought it was timely. Standing on the ground, he sent the wolf to attack. With just one attack, the wolf was able to overcome the bear. Mark thought he would get a lot of experience if he activated the doubling. Hearing a strange sound, the guy thought that there was still a fight going on nearby. Because of this, he decided to get away, but suddenly he was offered a rescue mission and 10 prestige points as a reward. Mark immediately decided to save the girl for the sake of those glasses. People were walking through the forest, but they did not detect any movement in front of them. They hoped that the noise of the battle would not attract anyone. The guards accompanied the butler from a noble family, and also the girl they all served. Suddenly, the guards saw Mark and tensed. To conceal his identity, Mark used a transformation mask and said that he had come here for training. Then everyone heard some noise and the guards tensed up. Then they told everyone to be on guard. Meanwhile, wild animals were rushing towards them. The girl turned to the guy and apologized for dragging him into this. Mark thought that the girl was well-mannered, unlike the guards. Then he stepped forward and said that he would help them. But the guard thought the guy would attack them when they were distracted. Then they told the guy to go away and not cause them any trouble. At that moment, a bear appeared behind the man. The man turned sharply towards him, and swinging his sword, he was able to cut the beast down. The butler suddenly said that there was also a bear next to the girl. Turning around, the girl was horrified. However, that bear was attacked by Mark. His blow sent the bear flying back. He was also given a reward for killing the beast. Meanwhile, everyone wondered who he was. The girl thought his strength was impressive. The security guard thought the guy was trying to move them. His partner didn't like Mark's behavior either. Then they simultaneously attacked the third bear. Looking at them, Mark grinned. Soon he continued to fight and defeat the bears just as easily. When all the animals were killed, the guards suggested rest. Having received the reward, Mark was glad that he had gained prestige points in an easy way. The girl approached the guards and offered them some restorative pills. Afterward, she offered them to Mark as well. This is how she wanted to thank him for his help. Seeing that the favor towards him had increased, Mark was glad. Having calmed down, he calmly took the pill. After introducing herself to Mark, the girl asked about his name. Mark introduced himself as Mika, deciding it was better to use a fake name. After listening to him, Kira asked the guy to become her security guard. Without hesitation, Mark immediately agreed. But the guards were unhappy and asked if Kira was sure of her decision. Watching them, Mark thought the guards hated him. Kira asked the men not to worry because she understood what she was doing. She was sure that everything would be fine because Mika was experienced and strong. The disgruntled security guard told the guy to follow their instructions and not cause any trouble. But Mark refused to listen to them because they were not his employer. He asked Kira what herb she was looking for here. The girl admitted that she was looking for dragontail grass, but it was difficult to find. Mark knew that this herb was not of high quality, but it was indeed rare. He suddenly asked if anyone in Kira's family suffered from cultivation deviation. While they were talking, the guard noticed the monster. He asked Kira not to worry and decided to take the beast upon himself. In fact, he wanted to surpass Mika. He rushed forward and jumped into the bushes, but it turned out that there was an ordinary fox in the bushes. Mark decided that the guard was dumber than expected. Since they couldn't find any grass all day, the guard suggested they go back. The girl understood that it was dangerous to stay here overnight, and she agreed. But suddenly Mika asked to let him lead the way. The guards just smirked at the guy's self-confidence. The guide told them that Kira was in a hurry to find some grass, and if they were scared, they could come back. Mark decided to find the grass himself because the guards were too slow. Suddenly, the guard objected that they were not scared, but simply worried about Kira. But he wanted to see how Mika would perform. Then Mark activated the luck aura. He decided that with her help, he would find the grass faster. Insanity points started to be spent quickly. As Mark walked forward, he thought that it had hurt his heart. But it seemed to him that the grass should have appeared by now. Suddenly, Kira noticed something. She exclaimed happily when she saw the dragontail grass. After showing it to the others, they agreed that it was the herb. Then Mark noticed another one. Mark approached her and tore it off, but suddenly he felt a sharp pain. Somehow he managed to injure himself on it. At that moment, Kira approached him. She praised and thanked Mika for being able to find the grass quickly. Mark's mission was complete, so he suggested that everyone return. But suddenly, everyone saw a ray of light ahead. At that moment, Mark was offered a time-limited mission, the legacy of the dragon god. Mark was surprised to learn that if the time limit was exceeded, he would be killed by the dragon god. He immediately thought it was because of the grass. Noticing that something was wrong, Kira turned to the guy. The grass must have absorbed Mark's blood, and that triggered the mission. If Mark was chosen by the dragon god, it means his luck was truly high. But when he came to his senses, Mark was surprised. For some reason, the beam hit one of the guards. Then Mark saw messages about the start of the mission. Now he had 3 days, and it was time for him to go into the forest. Because of this, Mark decided to say goodbye to Kira. Without waiting for an answer, he rushed forward. The guards decided that there must be treasure ahead, so they wanted to check that place. Kira wanted to stop them, but they didn't listen either. The guard was sure that Mika had a connection with the treasure. His partner asked him what they would do now. The guard offered to follow Mika until he found the treasure. Meanwhile, Mark began to kill monsters. The killed tiger collapsed to the ground. In a short time, he was able to further raise his cultivation level. Taking out the dragon grass, Mark noticed that it was glowing even brighter. Because of this, He thought he was approaching the right place. Then he ordered the wolf to move forward. Soon Mark noticed a strange glow. From it, he was able to determine where they should move next. At his command, the wolf rushed towards the wall of light, and I was able to pass through it without any difficulty. Mark's gaze turned into the distance, and the boy was surprised. Some kind of temple appeared in front of him. He decided that it was a dragon temple and told the wolf to stay outside. Mark moved forward, and the wolf disappeared into thin air. As Mark approached the doors, he was looking forward to what he might find inside. But suddenly he heard a strange sound. Taking out the grass, which glowed even brighter, he decided that it would help open the door. He carefully brought the grass to the door. At that very moment, a blinding light appeared around. The door began to open, and that light penetrated inside. Mark decided to enter there cautiously. Seeing the guy entering the temple, the guards decided to hurry. When Mark saw them, he was not surprised. Turning to them, he did not approve of their decision to follow him and abandon Kira. The guard said that apparently the herb was the key to the dragon temple, and Mika was very lucky. He said they would spare Mika's life if he gave up the grass. Without waiting for an answer, they decided to rush at the guy. But Mark was able to easily block their attacks. His hands suddenly changed, and he grabbed the guard by the face. He did the same with the second one. The system also gave him a reward for killing the guards. Mark thought that even though he had killed those two, he had nothing at all. But he wondered whether the one who received the dragon herb would become the heir. Mark accidentally stepped on the trap, and a wind rose in the room. Having reacted, the guy was able to dodge the arrows. And using the techniques, he continued to avoid other arrows. In this way, he was able to move to the side. He knew that it was not easy to get the inheritance, but a couple of arrows could not stop him. Afterwards, he moved on. Entering the next room, he sighed heavily. Mark immediately recognized the statues of the dragon warriors. Looking around, he thought that this place must have been important to the dragons. But the dragons were forced to leave this place when people expanded their territory. Suddenly, one of the statues began to move, and she told Mark that he had to fight to move forward. When the statue attacked, Mark was able to dodge, and he began to climb up the statue's weapon. In an instant, he reached the head of the statue, and he hit her in the head with all his might. His blow left a crack on the statue's head. It began to spread, and eventually the statue collapsed. However, at that very moment, Mark began to be attacked by the second statue. Noticing her, Mark decided that he would be in trouble. Having managed to react, the guy activated invisibility, and I was able to get to the statues from behind. At the same time, he decided to activate the evaluative eye. Thanks to this, he was able to learn the characteristics of the statues. Having learned that his opponents were his equal, the boy rushed forward. And activating the aura of luck, Mark attacked. Because of this, the statues began to collapse one after another. But when everything calmed down, he was dissatisfied with something. He was upset that even with luck activated, he didn't really get anything. Suddenly, he heard some noise. Something large began to appear in front of him. Mark stood up from his seat and decided to come closer. A new statue appeared in front of him, and it felt like more pressure. Mark immediately decided that he was looking at the legendary dragon god. Besides, Mark's eye could not appreciate this statue. Suddenly, the statue's eyes flashed red. The statue said that her descendant was finally here. Mark thought the statue mistook him for someone from the dragon race. The statue told the boy to swallow the dragon god's herb and accept his heritage. Then Mark realized that what he had was not dragon tail grass at all. But before he could decide what to do next, the grass itself ended up in his mouth. Suddenly, Mark felt a surge of energy. A tremendous power began to fill his body. His body, which had previously been unable to cultivate due to a lack of blood chi, was now changing. For consuming the dragon grass, the system gave him experience points again. At that moment, everything began to gradually calm down. Mark wondered if he could really be the heir. He had never seen his father, but he had heard that he was a powerful cultivator. And now the dragon god's herb had awakened his power. Mark's body began to emit light again. Upon completing the mission, Mark received the lineage of the dragon god. After some time, many people came to the temple and tried to get inside. But before they could try, the door opened itself. People got scared, thinking that the owner of the castle might come out and decided to run away. From a distance, they saw a man come out. Upon leaving, Mark immediately applied an appraising glance, and I was able to understand what kind of power these people had. Although they were weak, there were many of these people, so Mark understood that he would not be able to leave easily. With this thought in mind, he slowly moved forward. Suddenly, someone decided to stop him, wanting to get the treasure. But Mark replied that if they wanted the treasure, they would have to take it themselves. The man asked Mark how he got into the castle. Mark replied that he just walked in there, and if they wanted something, they had to rely only on themselves. This made everyone angry, and they began to threaten Mark to make him give them the treasure. But Mark asked why he should give it up. One man decided to intervene in the fight and attacked Mark. However, Mark easily stopped his hand and squeezed it. Feeling a sharp pain, the man screamed. Afterwards, his hand froze and collapsed. Seeing such a sight, everyone became even more wary but did not want to retreat. Mark was surprised that he had already injured one, but the others were not bothered. Mark decided to warn them one last time that if they did not retreat, they would die here. But everyone decided to just kill Mark. Preparing for battle, Mark activated his madness mode and immediately attacked everyone. Most were killed immediately, and the survivors decided to flee. Mark thought that this weapon was really good, but unfortunately, it was disposable. But Mark thought that with its help, he could level up faster. 3 days later, there was a fuss about Mark. People already knew that he was strong, but they still wanted to take the treasures from him. Mark himself decided to return to his palace, since there was little time left before the ruins were discovered. On the street, he crossed paths with Kira and the butler. Kira immediately recognized the guy and turned to look at him. Taking off his hat, Mika immediately said hello and asked if the herb had helped her. The girl reported that the herb had a temporary effect and that another herb was needed. Mika was surprised that the dragontail grass was powerless. Suddenly, the butler said that a herb that brings back the soul would help. He said that if you combine these two herbs, the effect will be amazing. Mark agreed with this, but if there is too much of the second herb, it can damage a person's soul. Hearing this, the man became frightened. Suddenly, Mika sharply asked what the patient's mental state was. Kira admitted that the patient is her father, who is currently in a coma. Mika said that using soulgrass is dangerous because the patient could end up in a permanent coma. The man was outraged that the treatment he had invented could be dangerous, since he was a third-class alchemist. Afterwards, he asked where Mika was from, but the guy didn't think it was necessary to answer. But the man wondered what qualifications a person who condemned an alchemist had to have. Mika insisted that if Kira was telling the truth, they shouldn't use the soul herb. Mark said that he was also an alchemist, and Kira could trust him with her father. Then the girl began to doubt. But after some thought, she agreed. Because of this, Mark received a new mission. Suddenly, Kira was asked if she really believed this nonsense. The man decided to go with them because he wanted to see what Mika was capable of. But if the guy doesn't get anything, the man will have to pay double the amount for the treatment. Mark said that if he failed, he would pay as much as the man wanted. When Mika was brought to the patient, he asked how the man had been treated before. The butler said that they used dragon grass to make pills. After listening, Mika said that they didn't even know how to use that herb properly. The guy said that to cure it, they need to mix the patient's blood with dragon grass before they make the pills. And few alchemists knew about such a method. The man objected that this method was dangerous. The guy asked if the man could be held responsible if he distracted the guy and some incident occurred. Everyone was surprised that Mark made the pill even without an oven. He was able to do it with the help of spiritual fire. And Mark successfully created the second-level pill. Afterwards, Mika told Kira to give the pill to her father. The butler refused to say anything for now, wanting to see the result. At that moment, the pill was given to the man, and almost immediately he opened his eyes. This made Kira happy. The father recognized his daughter and said that he now feels better. Kira told her father that the pill had been made by a new alchemist. Mark was glad that the pill was able to help. When the man woke up, the butler decided to leave. Mark was glad that the man didn't try to complicate the situation. In gratitude, Mika was presented with an alchemist's furnace. They asked the guy to accept it so that the stove wouldn't sit idle. They thought that Mika was a worthy person to whom they could give this stove. They also hoped that the guy would continue to help them. In gratitude for this, Mark decided to stay with them and make them some pills. After a couple of days, Mark was able to make a lot of pills. Mark was pleased that he had leveled up again. Suddenly, the maid came running with bad news. Soon, everyone learned that the man had recovered. At that moment, Kira and Mika entered the room. They immediately heard several voices. One man asked to borrow the furnace of the alchemists from the Kira family, but the man asked how their family could have such a valuable thing. Then the guest got angry and said that this information was accurate, and then he asked if their family still had support. He demanded that they give them the oven because it was a wise decision, and also give Cyrus as a concubine to his son. Otherwise, he promised to destroy their family. Everyone agreed that it was his choice to live or die. Worried, Kira waited for her father's reaction. Getting angry, he told them to go away and leave them alone, but they continued to insist that the oven be given to them. Then Kira's father said that even if he gave them the oven, they would not leave them alone. Then another guest said that if they got the stove, Kira's father would be guaranteed an easy death. Suddenly, Mark showed everyone that very oven. Kira's father asked him to leave because it was none of the boy's business, but he refused to abandon Kira's family in trouble. One man chuckled that the stove, an important item, was given to a child. Then everyone looked at Mark and demanded that he give up the oven. But he said that he would spare everyone's lives if they left now. This outraged the men. One of them immediately decided to intervene in the fight. Kira's father asked Mika to take his daughter and leave here, but Mika asked him not to worry. Mark's opponent asked the guy not to be so arrogant. At that moment, their battle began. Quickly closing the distance, Mark delivered the first blow. Then another man entered the fight. He took out his sword and was about to attack the guy. Then a bright light enveloped him. Because of this, Kira began to worry about Mika. Her father also tried to warn the boy about the danger. However, Mark easily broke his opponent's sword. The sword's owner was greatly surprised by this, and Mark was glad that his own weapon turned out to be better. He then used an ice glove and hit the man in the stomach. After that, he instantly froze, and losing its balance, the ice figure began to fall. Watching this, Kira's father thought with horror that the guy was very strong. Then Mark used the star absorption skill. Because of this, he started to receive a lot of experience points. Then Mark's opponents wondered who the guy really was. But Mark replied that they didn't need to know. After all, it was their greed that led them to this. Frightened, one man said that he had treasure with him. But Mark asked to be taken with him into the afterlife. Getting even more frightened, the man began to say that the guy couldn't kill him. But Mark ignored this and killed them anyway. After checking the system, he was disappointed that he still needed a lot of experience to level up. Then Kira's father approached him, and Mika asked him if there were any more enemies left. A little embarrassed, Kira replied that this was not true. Her father explained that the only enemies were those who wanted to take the oven while he was sick. Suddenly, someone entered, surprised by Mark's strength. The man introduced himself as the co-director of the Celestial Phoenix Association. Among them, Mark saw the alchemist he already knew. Because of this, Mark decided that the alchemist could no longer be released, and used an evaluative look. The Phoenix leader was at the 4th stage of core condensation. The man next to him was on 3rd, and the alchemist is at the 7th stage of purification. The two subordinates were at the 3rd and 4th stages of purification. The manager said he would be glad if Mika joined them. Mark decided to solve everything himself and asked Kira and her father to leave. He understood that most likely they would also want to kill Kira's father. When Mark rejected their offer, the man asked them to take their time. It turned out they were willing to let Mark keep the oven if he joined them. The manager hoped for Kira's wise decision. But Mark said that bastards like them were always the same. Everyone became wary, and the leader asked the guy not to get ahead of himself. At that moment, his subordinates rushed at Mark. Mark looked at them like they were a bunch of pathetic bastards. Taking the ice glove, he was ready to attack. He hit the floor with all his might, and ice appeared from there. That blow stung his opponents, and almost immediately they froze. After his attack, Mark began to rise slowly. Then the leader asked him who he was. Having said that Mark had killed people like them, he reached out to the man's face. Then he began to gain a lot of experience. Cracks began to appear on the ice blocks, and soon the ice cracked. Afterwards, Mark looked down at the floor. It turned out that the leader was still alive, who was surprised at how Mark could be so strong. But the guy said it didn't matter if the man was going to die anyway, and the man replied that his death would be avenged. Taking off his mask, Mark replied that this was nothing new for him. At the last moment, the man was able to recognize Mark. However, at that very moment, Mark crushed his head. Mark soon apologized to the family that they would not be able to stay there, and then he said goodbye. Kira felt sorry that she couldn't ask the guy to stay. Suddenly, Mark turned around, and he told Kira that they would meet again if fate allowed. Meanwhile, Mark's palace was calm. The girl told Kylie that the ruins would open soon and the last participant needed to be identified. But she decided to leave the place empty and wait for Mark to return. The girl replied that if they allowed the boy to return, they would make the Phoenix Hall and the God Clan their enemies. Kylie said that Mark taught them a lesson because they were being dirty. The girl objected that even if that were the case, they could not allow Mark to insult the big clans. Suddenly a maid came to them and said that Kylie needed to go out. The girl was informed that people from the God Clan and the Heavenly Spirit sect were here. Kylie knew there was nothing good about their arrival. Soon everyone gathered on the street. Kylie asked those who came why they were there. They said that they had come to demand that they be given places in the ruins, since they had to compensate for Mark's misdeeds. The elders said that Mark was no longer their disciple, but the man considered it stupid to think that since the guy gave up his place, it did not concern their castle. Then Kylie intervened and said that Mark was provoked every time. The man asked who could confirm this. He added that they wanted to ask Mark a couple of questions, but he killed everyone. However, Kylie refused to believe it. Since Kylie refused to give up the ruins, those who came prepared for battle. Kylie warned that if they were cornered, both clans would suffer. The man thought with a grin that Kylie would ask for help from a student who had gotten married. These words outraged Kylie. Another man intervened and supported his comrade. Suddenly, one girl told him that he was a merchant and should not interfere with this. The man explained that they also suffered because of Mark. However, they were willing to forget about what happened if Kylie agreed to their terms. The man wanted to get the ruins and take Kylie as his wife. His insolence outraged Kylie. But suddenly someone advised the man to look in the mirror and think about whether he was really worthy. The elder was outraged that Mark was clearly seeking death here. The merchant was glad that Mark himself came into their hands. The man asked whether the guy should be called brave or just stupid. But Mark said that the only stupid one here is the one who dreams of marrying Kylie. Then the man replied that he could kill Mark with just one finger. Suddenly he heard a voice behind him. Kylie wasn't about to watch Mark get threatened. The man acknowledged Kylie's strength, but doubted she could defeat 3 of them at once. Meanwhile, others were getting ready to grab Mark, and Kylie also rushed into battle. Her approach made the opponents wary, and in an instant they snatched up their weapons and equipment. But suddenly they were struck by some light. A strong wind arose, making it difficult for the men to stand still. The girls asked Kylie if she was okay. Kylie replied that she was fine and that they had to help Mark. Meanwhile, everyone pointed their guns at Mark. Kylie knew she had to save him. But the man said that if she interfered, he could not guarantee what the others would do to the boy. So he gave her one last chance to agree to the terms, and the treasure of their castle to boot. Having heard about the treasure, the other girls were not going to stand aside. The man was delighted, because now he could kill Mark and destroy Kylie's palace. Kylie became angry and gripped her sword tightly, and then suddenly she let go. She was ready to agree to the demands, but first she wanted them to let Mark go. The man thought Mark was lucky that Kylie was willing to go that far. However, Mark no longer needed Kylie's protection. Drawing his weapon, he dealt with those surrounding him in an instant. Everyone was surprised that Mark was so strong. Mark told them that he would deal with those who encroach on his aunt and the treasures of their castle. Seeing his strength, Kylie was surprised. Meanwhile, Mark decided to use the 10,000 swords technique. In an instant, knives began to appear next to him, and then he gave them direction. Instantly, he killed another 10 people and gained experience. Panicking, the man ordered Mark to be stopped. However, many had already been defeated. Because of this, the merchant decided to intervene in the fight and created a huge stream of air. Dodging, Mark once again reminded them that he would kill them all here. Then he activated the crazy damage mode and also invisibility and disappeared from the enemy's sight. Suddenly, the merchant felt pain. For killing the merchant, Mark received experience and combat equipment. However, at that moment, someone pointed swords at him. At that moment, Kylie rushed in and blocked the attack aimed at Mark. And then she shamed the clan leader for using a hidden weapon. Mark was touched by Kylie's usual urgency to defend him. She always preferred to stay on Mark's side. At that moment, Kylie asked why Mark had taken so long to return. Mark replied that he did not want the palace to get into trouble because of him. Kylie countered that she still had to take care of him. The clan leader was angry that a snotty scene was being played out in front of him, and then he sent his disciples to kill everyone. Then everyone joined the fight. The leader ordered his men to leave no one alive. However, Kylie was outraged that he continued to cross the line. Then she decided to engage in battle with him, but someone jumped out to meet her. Having reacted, the girl was able to block the attack. The man promised that the entire Kylie castle would be covered in blood. The girl frowned with anger. At that moment, Mark decided to intervene. Armed with an ice glove, he rushed forward, and in one instant, he froze all the enemies in front of him. When everyone froze in an instant, the girls were surprised. After his attack, Mark asked who else would dare to attack them. Gradually, cracks began to appear on the ice blocks. Kylie immediately decided that it was because of Mark, who was now really strong. Then she heard the ice crack. The crack began to spread rapidly across the ice. Breaking the ice, Mark told Kylie that as long as he was there, no one would dare harm them. Seeing him like this, Kylie was surprised for a moment, but suddenly she heard a strange crackling sound. And turning around sharply, she remembered that now was not the time to relax. The ice cracked, but in fact, the leader survived and tried to get out of it. Rushing towards him, Kylie told Mark that she would take over the leadership. While he was trying to get out, Kylie had already gotten close to him. but she didn't notice that someone was trying to attack her from behind. Noticing the attack too late, Kylie didn't have time to dodge it. When she was attacked, Mark began to worry about her. He immediately ran up to her to check what condition Kylie was in. He immediately took out a restorative pill and told his aunt to eat it. But Kylie told him she was fine. Afterwards, they looked at the man who was emitting a strong aura. Mark didn't know who the man was, so I applied an appraising eye. The man had a 9th stage of core concentration, good spiritual armor and combat technique. But Mark was delighted to see the boss and was already anticipating the reward he would receive for it. And he immediately accepted the task that the system offered him. Seeing the ancestor, the clan leader rushed towards him, and he reported that Mark had frozen all their people and had already killed more than half of them. The man was angry that they couldn't even capture the palace, so he had to intervene himself. He had previously planned to use a sneak attack, but now it won't work. As he decided to engage in battle, mana began to thicken around him, and then he asked Mark to show him how strong he was. At that moment, something took hold of his students, and they were able to instantly break free from Mark's ice. Kylie immediately realized that there was someone strong in front of them. She also heard that he killed many cultivators and used their blood to concentrate evil in his hand. She asked Mark to be careful, but he, as always, asked her not to worry about him. The man grinned and sent his pawns into battle, but the girls volunteered to take them on. They immediately rushed into battle. Mark told the man that he would pay for hurting Kylie. After listening to Mark, he wanted to see what the guy was capable of. Grabbing the weapon, Mark rushed forward. A chill ran through his hand as he approached his opponent. He didn't dodge, so he immediately began to become covered in ice. In an instant, a huge block appeared in front of Mark. Mark continued to touch the ice with his hand until everything calmed down. The attack had left him exhausted and he was breathing heavily. Slowly, he removed his hand from the ice. The guy thought that this was his strongest attack with the ice glove. But suddenly, he heard a sharp sound. It turns out that his enemy has already begun to break through the barrier. At that moment, the ice cracked, and the man recognized Mark's strength, even though it was useless against him. At that moment, his power began to infuse Mark's allies. Even the elders were subjected to that attack. Mark also felt the enemy's strong, evil aura. And since he had used a lot of his power before, it was now more difficult to block this aura. Suddenly, someone called Mark. Then the guy noticed that the aura began to dissipate. Kylie approached Mark, asking him to help the others, and she asked that this enemy be given to her, because he had too much strength. But Mark told her that he was no longer a child and could now protect everyone. That's why Mark asked to trust him. After a brief silence, Kylie agreed. However, Mark's opponent was surprised that the guy still wanted to fight him. The clan leader shouted at Mark that he could not defeat their ancestor. Suddenly, the ancestor said that Mark had killed many of his people, which meant he was better than many of his clan, and he wanted Mark to join them. But the boy preferred death to joining them. And he also had no intention of letting them destroy this castle. As soon as he said this, the dragon spirit burst out of his body, and Mark himself was enveloped in a bright aura. Noticing this, Kylie was surprised by his new strength, and then she admitted that Mark really was no longer the child she remembered him as. Suddenly, the ancestor asked if Mark belonged to the dragon race, but Mark didn't answer and just looked at the man. And then his aura began to spread rapidly. Mark did not consider it necessary to answer and was eager to fight him. The man chuckled and admitted that he hadn't expected someone like Mark to be hiding in this place. And then he attacked Mark. But Mark was going to destroy the blow that was coming towards him. With the help of technology, he managed to do this. Seeing his success, the enemy could not believe it. The next moment, he had to defend himself from Mark's attack. The strong blow even threw him back a little. The man had to admit that the dragon's power was terrifying because Mark had destroyed its barrier so easily. But Mark was just beginning to attack him. He came closer again and was about to attack. Using the technique, he swung and struck. She caught up with her ancestor with lightning speed. The man didn't have time to react before his face was illuminated by a bright light. However, at that very moment, he chuckled and told me not to look down on him. Pulling his hand back, he also used one of his techniques. Then a sword appeared in his hand, and swinging it, he attacked Mark. An evil aura emanated from him, and a powerful attack was approaching Mark. Seeing this, Mark hesitated for a moment. He was surprised that the man had a powerful spiritual weapon. His opponent was amused by the fact that Mark was soon to die. This made Mark click his tongue in displeasure, and then I decided to use the star absorption technique. His hands were enveloped in mana and he was ready to attack. Gradually, mana accumulated not only around his hands, but also around Mark himself. Seeing this, the ancestor was surprised, and then he decided to continue attacking in order to further reveal Mark's abilities. Using his appraising eye, Mark saw that the man's sword had high combat power. Having learned this, he still rushed forward. Noticing his approach, the enemy swung. Mark was going to attack him so that they could find out who was stronger. The ancestor told Mark that he only longed for death. But to his surprise, Mark passed him and moved on. At that moment, he was about to kill another. When the clan leader was attacked, he asked his ancestor for help. However, he was completely absorbed by Mark's mana, and it was too late. The ancestor was angry that Mark had done something like that. Because Mark killed the leader, the system gave him rewards. He laughed to himself because now his strength had increased, and he could fight equally with his ancestor. At that moment, the ancestor was already attacking him. When the attack was directed at his back, Mark continued to stand his ground. But then he turned around and laughed, and the next moment he repelled the attack. Thus she passed him by, and immediately after that he rushed towards his ancestor and attacked him. The man didn't understand how Mark could be so fast. Unable to dodge the attack, he lost his balance and fell. But almost immediately he rose to his feet. The man was angry that Mark's strength and speed had suddenly increased, but he refused to give in and bit his fingers, and the blood that flowed from them was smeared on his sword. At that moment, dark mana began to thicken around the sword. Soon it began to envelop the ancestor as well. Because of this, his fighting ability also suddenly increased. Mark noticed it immediately and thought that he had taken a berserker potion. Feeling the evil aura, Kylie thought that this was the true power of the ancestor. The man shouted that he would let Mark see his true strength, and he promised that today he would paint their palace red. He continued that when he was finished, the palace would be wiped off the face of the earth. Meanwhile, Mark decided to use the insanity points he had accumulated over time. He also decided to improve the combat mode and the dragon's bloodline. Then the dragon spirit appeared next to him again. The man tensed up when he felt that dragon's aura. Rushing forward, Mac wanted to end it all. But the ancestor swung his sword and told Mark not to be impudent. But despite this, Mark still approached the enemy, and in one moment he was able to destroy his barrier. And then he hit the man in the face. Mark's blow was so strong that the ancestor could not stand still and flew back. Then Mark said that no one would dare touch their palace. When he dealt with the ancestor, people were freed from his influence. The evil aura dissipated and everyone came to their senses. And from the collision of the ancestor with the surface, a hole was even formed. The aura around him was no longer so thick. Due to severe injuries, the man was coughing up blood. Approaching the man, Mark spoke to him. He offered him a choice: die here or take his people and leave. But the man only asked how Mark's cultivation had grown so dramatically during this time. Mark refused to answer and gave his ancestor a few seconds to choose. He immediately stood up from his seat, preparing to use one of his techniques. He was ready to sacrifice everything to kill Mark. At that moment, he summoned the spirit. He attacked Mark, but the guy was in no hurry to dodge. Once the ancestor had made his choice, Mark also decided to attack. His dragon spirit immediately dispelled the man's attack. After this, he was able to approach his ancestor, and he punched him in the stomach with all his might. The man was even thrown into the air by the strong blow. As he prepared to jump, Mark promised that he would explain to everyone the consequences of an attack on their palace. Then he jumped into the air, and he kicked his ancestor in the face. After this blow, the man began to fall rapidly. Watching this, Kylie realized that Mark was now strong and no longer needed her help. The violent impact with the ground created a hole in which the ancestor lay. The man said that even after his death, their castle would not be safe, because reinforcements would arrive here. But Mark didn't care, because he was ready to kill anyone who came here. Having said this, he dealt the final blow. The earth cracked under its force, and then messages from the system began to sound. As a reward, Mark received 2 pieces of holy class equipment at once, which surprised him a little. Suddenly, someone lightly hit him on the head. Kylie said that even though he helped them, she would not forgive him for running away. Mark replied that he simply did not want to involve the palace in their squabbles. Kylie was upset that Mark didn't even send her messages about what was going on. Mark was surprised when he saw Kylie's tears for the first time, and then he began to calm her down, saying that he would be able to protect her in the future. But Kylie told him that he was just being presumptuous right now, but she admitted that she was still glad to hear it from him. These words touched Mark, but he couldn't find what to answer. Soon a meeting began, at which Kylie announced that she wanted to make Mark an elder. There were no objections. Then Mark stood up and said that he wanted to say something. He admitted that he thought it would be better if he remained an outside disciple, and besides, he was not very good at managing affairs. Kylie replied that he shouldn't worry about it because he just had to represent their palace. And then she added that if she allowed Mark to manage the palace, it would fall apart that same day. Mark was pleased with what she said and replied that it was probably great. Kylie added that since the leaders of 3 clans had died today, the rest would not let it slide. Hearing Kylie talk about the treasures of their castle, Mark wondered what they were. Kylie continued that she wanted to give the treasure to Mark so that he could use it if needed. The elder objected that the treasures were always used only by the lord of the palace. Kylie replied that she knew this, but since Mark was much stronger than her, it would be better to give the treasures to him. Then Mark said that he didn't even know what these treasures were. Soon, Mark was shown the treasure. He realized that the treasure was unusual because its presence immediately caused the temperature to drop. Kylie said that if you combine it with ice-type skills, the effect will be increased. Mark admitted that such an item deserved to be called a treasure, and then he quickly closed the box. He told Kylie that such an item would not suit him and that Kylie should keep it for herself. Then they began to argue about who would get the treasure. In the end, Kylie agreed to keep the treasure for Mark. She then added that since they had killed the clan leaders, they now had extra slots for ruins. And Mark was supposed to help with the selection of 8 students, but he asked what about himself. Then there was silence. Kylie reported that only those who had a level of spiritual perfection could enter the ruins, but Mark was already stronger. This made Mark wonder how he could fulfill his main mission. Kylie continued that with Mark's cultivation level, going there was pointless, as it wouldn't increase his strength. Then Mark agreed with her. However, he sighed heavily at such news. He thought that he had to fulfill his main mission, otherwise he would not move forward. But he decided to think about it later. Instead, he decided to participate in the lottery. Mark immediately decided to activate luck, and he gave the command to start the lottery. However, on the first try, Mark got the consumables, and this angered him. The next few times it happened again, and Mark became even more angry. But suddenly he noticed something. It turns out that he was given a life that is automatically used after Mark's death. The guy was glad that not all the consumables were useless. He wanted to get another life like that, but the sword fell on him. And then weapons continued to rain down on him again and again. Mark was upset that he was given pills that had no effect at all, and he thought that all he could do was wait for the ruins to open up. The next day, many people were nervous. Due to recent incidents, the assessment test was conducted more quickly this time, but Mark was worried that it might be too early for Eliza. Eliza felt embarrassed when she heard everyone talking about her because she was close to Mark. She was upset that everyone thought she had neither talent nor looks, and that she was of humble origin. But Mark told her not to listen to them. The girl was surprised when she heard Mark's voice. Mark said that when he was a scumbag, he heard things like that a lot, and she should have used her powers to prove she was right. These words inspired Eliza. The girls kept saying that Eliza had probably already been accepted and that she had come here for show. They didn't understand why Mark was even on the side of such a girl. Then Eliza told them that they could say bad things about her, but they shouldn't say the same about Mark, and she promised to prove her strength to them. But the girls were only amused by this. Their conversation was interrupted by someone's loud voice. The examiner arrived and was ready to begin the exam. Mark asked the man to conduct the exam without paying any special attention to anyone. Then the examiner told everyone to call upon the spiritual array. Everyone had to stand in the spiritual strike array for as long as possible. To become an outer disciple, they had to endure 9 rounds. Everyone was surprised and thought they would have to endure much more. But Eliza decided to become an official student and last more than 11 rounds. Soon, everyone gathered around the circle. But everyone laughed at Eliza's desire to become an official student. Everyone was whispering that even if Eliza didn't last the required number of rounds, she would still become an official student with Mark's help. Hearing the conversations, the examiner told everyone to shut up. After that, the exam began. With its beginning, everything around was filled with light. Everyone easily survived the first round. In the second round, no one was eliminated either. This continued for 2 more rounds. But on the 5th, the girls started to fall off their feet. Well, Eliza was still holding on in the 6th round. And in the 7th round, many began to be surprised by her strength. They couldn't understand how a commoner could go so far. Meanwhile, the 9th round was already underway. At that moment, only Eliza continued to hold on. By the 10th round, the examiner thought Eliza had potential. In the 11th round, Eliza's legs began to shake, and on the 12th, she couldn't take it anymore. Then the girls started to get angry because they had previously said that Eliza was only here because of her connection with Mark, but they still didn't understand where a girl from a poor family got such abilities from. When it was all over, Mark praised Eliza. Running towards him, Eliza said that she had succeeded. Hugging her, Mark agreed that she had done it and proved to everyone who she was. He congratulated her on being an inner disciple now. Still crying, Eliza thanked him. At that moment, Mark saw messages that he had completed the hidden task. But he did not understand why Eliza was called a saint and asked the girl about it directly. Eliza didn't understand what he was talking about, and then Mark asked her to forget about it. When Mark asked about her parents, it turned out that Eliza had never seen them, and even her brother was not a blood relative. When Eliza became alarmed by this question, Mark asked her not to worry about it. Mark suggested that Eliza was abandoned as a child, but it was unclear why the clan would do that. Mark told her that Eliza had great potential, so next time she could enter the ruins. Eliza replied that she didn't mind and was glad that she could join them. A month later, Mark had to accompany someone, and Kylie will remain in the palace, as she had to take care of many things. She asked Mark not to worry about someone attacking the palace. Having said goodbye, they set off on their journey, and soon Mark arrived at the gates leading to the ancient ruins. Now he had to figure out how to get inside. Looking around, he saw that most of the people here were from the second-class factions. Suddenly, someone addressed him. Mark saw that in front of him was the head of the Heavenly Land clan. Mark said that Kylie was busy this time, so Mark came on her behalf. The clan leader replied that he had already heard that they had been attacked by 3 great forces, but they had all been defeated. Then one elder intervened in the conversation. But just at that moment, everyone heard a strange sound. There were shouts of joy as the gates to the ancient ruins opened. The gates opened with a roar. Everyone was happy that they could now go inside. Chaotically, everyone rushed into the gate. Mark was ready to try to get in, no matter what it took. Then Mark told the elder that he wanted to try to enter. Then the girl allowed him to try and gave him a token for it. When Mark saw the token for entering the ruins, he thought there was nothing special about it. But he decided to try anyway. But he didn't enter right away, but only lightly touched the entrance with his foot. Surprisingly, Mark did not feel the force rejecting him. Seeing him enter inside, the elder was surprised. She thought it was strange because Mark wasn't supposed to go in there. And when she touched the gate, she was convinced that the restrictions still existed. Seeing that the elder couldn't get in, Mark thought that it was because of the system that he had succeeded. But now he was glad that he would be able to complete the mission. Then he suddenly became surprised and looked into the distance. Before his eyes were ancient ruins called Heaven's Dive. He knew that these ruins had been explored and most of the treasures had been taken. The girls were surprised that Mark was able to get in, and the guy replied that he was just lucky. Suddenly, Mark heard another voice. Frank, a disciple of the Heavenly Land clan, spoke to Mark. Mark asked the guy what he wanted. The guy answered Mark that he was very famous and there was even an award for him. But this did not surprise Mark, and he asked what happened. Frank chuckled and said that they said that Mark was very strong and had made a lot of noise, and in the end, he needed the help of his palace. Frank said that Mark should rely on his own strength, not on girls. The girls were outraged that the stranger was talking such nonsense. But Frank wanted Mark to speak for himself, not others. But Mark didn't answer and told the students to leave. Frank said that Mark had fought alone against many, but now he was running away. Then the girls answered the impudent man that he shouldn't speak as if he knew what really happened. However, he was angered by the girls constantly interfering. And if Mark was really as strong as they said, Frank wanted to challenge him to a duel. But Mark refused because he wasn't interested. Then Frank was only convinced that Mark was a coward who hid behind girls. Suddenly, Mark said that it was good that Frank had attracted his attention. He offered to have a duel for life right then and there. Frank immediately agreed and prepared to fight. He rushed towards Mark while the guy was still standing in place. Mark easily dodged and told his opponent that he was too slow. And then he attacked Frank, causing him to scream. Then Mark kicked the guy, causing him to fly to the side. Frank crashed into a rock at full speed. After killing Frank, the system gave Mark a reward. The noise brought other disciples of the Heavenly Land running. To their horror, they discovered that Frank was already dead. One of them told Mark that the head of the clan would not let him go for the murders. But Mark replied that Frank himself had started this duel. And then he said that no one would dare to insult their palace. Otherwise, Mark himself will offer to fight to the death. Afterwards, Mark told everyone to move on because they had wasted their time here. When the girls asked Mark what he would do there, he replied that he would look for treasure. One of them said that there were no treasures left except the test obelisk. Seeing the building in front of him, Mark decided to go there. The others followed him. Mark hoped that he would find something here that would help him in his mission. He saw the very obelisk in front of which people sat and meditated. This allowed them to learn new techniques based on their standard. The highest rank of combat equipment was the sky rank, and the lowest was the human rank. Meditation brought its fruits to the cultivator. The man reached out his hand to the scroll that appeared. But it turned out that it was a medium-rank combat vehicle. Disappointed, he had to leave, and Mark wondered what secret was hidden here. Then he also decided to meditate. For a while, nothing happened. But after that, Mark's soul separated from his body, and she rushed upward. Having risen to the pillar, Mark's spirit seemed to leave its mark on it. And after that, the room was illuminated by a bright light. Suddenly, Mark found himself in a different place. He was in a place where there were stones on which the names of martial techniques were written. Mark knew that after choosing the technique, it would disappear from here, and perhaps he had to rely on luck in his choice. Afterwards, he decided to activate the luck aura, and he walked calmly around the area. But suddenly, he saw a stone on which there was no inscription. Approaching him, Mark began to examine him and thought that his luck was not so good yet. However, he noticed that from the very beginning he had been going in circles and returning to this area. Mark felt like he was in a labyrinth. Suddenly, light began to emanate from the stone. Then Mark thought that in front of him was the core of the labyrinth. This means that Mark was in front of the core the whole time. He was upset that he had wasted so many insanity points. With this thought, he destroyed the core. Then all the stones began to scatter in the wind. They were all destroyed to the ground, and Mark ended up in the middle of nowhere. However, he believed that he had finally reached his goal. He thought that to get here, he had to break through the labyrinth outside. Suddenly, he heard a rustling sound below. Looking closer, Mark saw that there was a path there. Walking along it, he soon discovered some kind of courtyard. Arriving at the courtyard, Mark noticed that the courtyard was simple in appearance. But Mark believed that this was what made the yard special, because real cultivators did not dwell on luxury and behaved modestly. Then he knocked lightly on the door. When he was told to come in, Mark was surprised that there was actually someone inside. Seeing the old man, Mark greeted him, but the elder said that formalities were not necessary because he was just a manager. Afterwards, he brought Mark to his master. However, Mark did not see any other people in the room besides them. There was only a figurine that was the king of spirits. The spirit king was slightly lower in level than the saint king. Mark guessed that the spiritual king had already passed away, and the elder confirmed this. Mark lit incense and decided to pay his respects to the spirit king. He felt sorry that the world had lost such a powerful cultivator. Suddenly, the elder said that Mark was worthy of becoming the master's heir. Mark was surprised that all he needed to do was offer incense, but the old man said that Mark was better than those insincere people who just wanted to get an inheritance. Mark asked if there had been anyone who had come here before. The old man confirmed this and added that they were unable to receive the inheritance because they were not sincere. Afterwards, he asked Mark not to worry because his master liked people like Mark. Then Mark asked what the test would be. The old man replied that in order to become the heir, one had to defeat his master. At that moment, everything around began to dissolve. Noticing this, Mark became wary, and soon there was only smoke around him. But soon, Mark saw a gap in the clouds of smoke. He found himself in the middle of the arena. At that moment, a spirit appeared before him. It was the spiritual consciousness that remained after the spirit king. Having heard that if he lost, Mark would lose his memory of this place, Mark immediately accepted the challenge. The spiritual image of the master was adjusted depending on Mark's age. Afterwards, the old man wished the guy good luck. Mark thought that it would not be easy to defeat such a man. At first, he applied an appraising glance. The fighting abilities of the spirit were constantly increasing. Mark was surprised that even though it was a young version of the Spirit King, even in this form, he was very strong. When Mark asked about the Spirit King's weapon, the old man replied that he never used it and relied only on his fists. Afterwards, the old man added that Mark could use any weapon he brought here, but Mark said he would also use his fists to show his respect. Then Mark was ready to begin. Instantly, the spirit soared upward, and then he flew at full speed to Mark. Mark was surprised that they decided to attack him so fiercely from the very beginning. The next moment, the collision occurred. The king's spirit struck the ground with his fist, but it turned out that he had pinned Mark to the ground, and he had grabbed his opponent's hand. When Mark did this, he could use the star absorption technique. Mark was glad that he could absorb the experience of the spirit creator. Even if it was the spirit king in front of him, Mark still wanted to make him a source of experience. During the battle, he thought that if he had come here later, he would not have had a chance of winning. But since he now had a system, Mark had many advantages. Suddenly, he noticed that the spirit wanted to kick him, but Mark reacted and dodged. Then he grabbed the spirit's hand again, and then he twisted it and asked if the spirit was going to escape. Without wasting any time, Mark decided to knee the spirit in the back, and he threw him to the ground so that he had no chance to escape. Mark acknowledged the strength of spirit, but if he couldn't attack, then everything was useless. Mark didn't take the pills because he was afraid that in his state of mind there would be no effects. Now, however, he was going to use them. Then Mark started receiving a lot of messages about gaining experience. The old man began to worry because the master's spiritual power was completely absorbed. However, Mark ignored this and continued to press. Then the old man began to demand that Mark stop. Meanwhile, due to his power, everything around began to collapse. The old man said that in this way the whole kingdom would collapse. Mark was surprised that such a kingdom could be easily destroyed and asked if this meant that he had passed. But the old man said that Mark must find another way to defeat the master. Mark replied that this was disappointing to him. At that moment, it rose to the 8th stage of core condensation. Then the old man became alarmed and asked him to stop absorbing the master's spiritual power. Mark had to agree, because if the kingdom collapsed, he would not receive the inheritance. Mark wanted to absorb more experience, but he understood that this would only destroy the kingdom. At that moment, the spirit was able to escape, and Mark said it was time to end this. He swung his arm well and hit the spirit with all his might, and then he also jumped into the sky. Having reached the spirit, Mark was about to hit him again, and with his blow, he sent the spirit straight to the ground. The strong impact created a hole. However, the king's spirit still survived. Mark wanted to hit him again, but then the spirit king's body dissolved. In fact, at that moment, he did defeat the spirit. He also received rewards from the system for his victory. Turning to the old man, the boy asked if he had passed. Trembling, the old man confirmed this and noted that Mark was much stronger than his master at that age. And then he congratulated Mark on passing the test. Mark asked if the inheritance included power over the ruins and received an affirmative answer. The old man explained that when Mark received the inheritance, he would have natural power over these ruins. At that moment, Mark turned around. The space around them began to change and was filled with smoke. Soon everything changed and Mark found himself in a field. Before him appeared mysterious heavenly divine arts. Since the owner of this place was the Spirit King, Mark assumed that if he cultivated here, he would achieve the same greatness. The old man explained that the master died before he could develop this technique into a high-ranking heavenly martial art. But Mark said that creating your own combat equipment is already amazing. The old man said that Mark could start learning the technique right now, but whether he could finish it was up to Mark. If Mark can't do anything about it, then the rest of us can't either. And to fully connect it with his power, Mark needs to reach at least the 2nd level. A week later, everyone was getting ready to leave the ruins. However, everyone was worried about Mark because if he didn't finish on time, he wouldn't leave here for 3 years. For the others, this was another reason to laugh at him. Soon, everyone ran to the gates because the ruins would soon close. The girls understood that they also had to leave here, although they didn't want to. They didn't know whether Mark was currently locked inside or had entered a state of enlightenment, but they couldn't influence it. All they had to do was go out and tell the elder about it. Then the girl told everyone to leave. She was sad to leave Mark, but she didn't want the other students to be trapped here. They quickly emerged from the ruins. Meanwhile, others wanted to report what had happened to Frank. With horror, they told that the guy was killed by Mark. The surprised man asked what had happened there, and they told him everything. Soon he approached the elder and asked them to wait. The girl immediately guessed that Mark had created problems for them again. But another girl intervened and said that Mark had been provoked. She continued that this fact could easily be confirmed by other students who had seen everything. Then the leader asked the student if the girl was telling the truth. And then he hit the student, saying that if Frank died in the duel, it meant he was not strong enough. Afterwards, the student was forced to apologize to the others. After apologizing to the elder, the leader thought that they had invested a lot of resources into Frank, but he had died so easily. The girl accepted their apology and said that everything was fine. As they were leaving, the girl thought that they would probably want to provoke them further. And then she asked where Mark himself was now. Then she was informed that the boy was still meditating in the ruins. The elder said that the gates would close in less than a day. Meanwhile, Mark gained more and more power. Any technique could be engraved into his head, and then he could use it at his own discretion. In front of Mark was an unopened flower, and when it finally opened, the guy saw notifications that he had successfully cultivated to the divine art of the mysterious sky. Mark was glad that he had finally succeeded in this. The old man was a little surprised by Mark's exclamations, and then he was surprised that Mark had already made such progress. While he continued to be amazed by this, Mark boasted of his achievements, but the old man wanted to see Mark's strength. Without hesitation, Mark agreed to show it. At that time, mana was constantly accumulating around him. Mark was surprised by this feeling that now no one could harm him. The old man said that this technique also gave an attack boost. And then he added that with such power, Mark would inherit the legacy of the Spirit King and gain all power over the ruins. Suddenly, a beam of light shot towards Mark's forehead. While the old man greeted his new young master, Mark received messages and rewards from the system. Mark was glad that he was finally able to complete the main mission, but after that he decided to calm down, and he asked the old man if there was anything else he should wait for. The old man said that his master's last wish was to return to his clan and check on how things were going. Mark heard that the king hoped that his successor would go to that sect and join the High Heaven Mansion. Mark knew that this place must have been a third-class faction. At that moment, Mark received a new task from the system. However, in order to accomplish this, Mark needed 40 disciples who had reached the level of spiritual cultivation. And then he asked if all the martial arts techniques here belonged to him. The old man confirmed that absolutely everything here belonged to Mark. At that time, the ruins had already begun to close. Others were worried that Mark would be trapped there. Then the elder decided to leave Mark her ring, which contained food and water. It was all she could do for him now. Throwing the ring into the ruins, she said that they needed to figure out how to save him from there. The clan leader suddenly said sarcastically that this was all very sad. After all, he wanted to personally apologize to Mark, but he couldn't even come out. But the elder told him that they could handle everything themselves. When the elder was asked if Mark could survive, she replied that no one had ever managed to open the ruins from the outside. That's why she wanted to report everything to Kylie as soon as possible. A few days later, the ruins were already closed, but Mark was able to discover the elder's ring. He immediately recognized the ring and decided that everyone thought Mark was trapped here. Because of this, he decided it was time for him to return. Approaching the gates, Mark ordered them to open. Then an aura began to emanate from the gate, and Mark walked out of there calmly. But suddenly he heard someone's voice and turned around. Mark saw someone's figure in the bushes. The man came out and said that he didn't expect Mark to be able to open the ruins calmly. In front of Mark was the leader of the sect, who said that seeing Mark here was very unexpected. He admitted that Mark had impressed him. While everyone thought that Mark was trapped and would die, the leader did not believe it and turned out to be right. Afterwards, he said that if Mark gave him the ruins, then at least the guy's body would be untouched. Realizing that even if he handed over the ruins, he would still die, Mark concluded that the leader did not understand how deals worked. Then he used his assessing eye, and while the leader continued to chat, Mark managed to find out even his weak points. And then Mark told the man that he could not do what the leader wanted. Having prepared for battle, the man reminded that he had given Mark a chance. In an instant, the stones began to float around him. But Mark didn't pay attention to this and rushed forward. Meanwhile, the leader was about to launch an attack that would kill Mark. However, Mark got ahead of him and struck first. The man was even thrown back by the strong blow. Because of this, he even became confused and did not immediately start moving. But before he had a chance to do so, Mark stepped on him with his foot, and he asked whether to leave the man's body whole or dismember it. The leader did not understand how Mark's strength and speed could be greater than his own. But the man ignored Mark's question and told the guy to get out of there. He attacked, but Mark dodged that attack. While there was a distance between them, the leader rose to his feet. He rushed into the attack again and said that he would now show no mercy to Mark. Having finished speaking, he struck with stones. Watching this, Mark said that his abilities were not bad. However, he moved forward and broke the leader's spell. And hitting the man again, he told him that he was too weak. The first blow was followed by a second, which threw the man to the ground. Having received serious injuries, the man lay motionless for some time. Approaching him, Mark told him to stand up, and he reminded that it was he who needed power over the ruins. While trying to get up, the leader said that Mark's cultivation couldn't be that high, and guessed that Mark had entered the ruins by deception. Mark confirmed his guess and asked what difference it made. When Mark swung, the man immediately noticed it. After cursing, he decided to try to attack Mark. The attack was unexpected, and Mark was surprised. And then he tried to dodge the explosive bomb. At the last moment, Mark managed to fight her off. Because of this, she began to return to her owner. At that moment, there were seconds left before its activation, and before Mark's eyes, a powerful explosion appeared. The explosion seriously injured the leader, and he was unable to move. In tears, he began to beg to be let go, promising that he would not tell anyone what had happened. But Mark asked if he would let the enemy go in such a situation. And then he decided to finish off the leader. Because he fought dishonorably, Mark decided to kill him in a painful way. At the end of the battle, Mark again received a reward from the system. Mark received one of the leader's techniques as a reward, but he knew he couldn't use it. Otherwise, everyone would figure out who killed the man. And then Mark realized that the leader came here alone. Then he decided to burn the body to prevent trouble. Deciding it was time to return, Mark decided to give everyone a surprise. Meanwhile, there was unrest in the palace. Kylie knew their time of peace was over. She chuckled as their opponents finally stopped hiding. Then she was informed that there was an expert standing on the snowy mountain who was blocking their evacuation route. The elder blamed herself for allowing Mark to enter the ruins and for everything to end up like this. Kylie replied that it was no one's fault and that they needed to focus on defense now. Meanwhile, their enemies were already close. They were glad that they finally reached the palace. The progenitor of the clan of gods asked how they dared to attack them. The founder of the Heavenly Spirit sect was also unhappy that their disciple was killed. The Heavenly Phoenix Hall was also indignant. Then one old woman said that even though their palace was first class, that didn't mean they were easy to intimidate. Out of respect for her, the leader of the God clan said that he would give them a choice if they gave in. Otherwise, he promised that they would all die here today. But the old woman said that they would fight to the end, even if it cost them their lives. Hearing this, the man replied that their palace would fall today. He chuckled and told everyone to fight. Only then did Kylie learn that there were traitors among them, who had now revealed themselves. She turned indignantly towards the others, and she asked how they dared to behave like that. But hearing a sharp sound, she turned back. It turned out that the man tried to attack her from behind, but she managed to block the attack. The elder began to worry about Kylie, but she said to help the others. The elder was outraged that among the traitors were also their elite students. This whole situation made Kylie angry. At that moment, Mark was heading to the palace and he had a strange premonition. So he decided to hurry. The man said it was a shame that Mark was trapped in the ruins. Then he decided to give Kylie one last chance to surrender and then they could save their lives. Hearing this, Kylie did not immediately respond. Then she told everyone that if anyone wanted to give up, she wouldn't blame them. Almost immediately, several girls moved forward. Because of this, the mood of others began to change. But suddenly, Eliza asked what they were all doing. She asked why the others did not believe in the ruler and the elder. Then the man asked who the girl was. When he learned that Mark had brought her, he was not surprised that the girl was trying to protect the palace. Afterwards, he asked Eliza what was the point of lecturing them if they were all going to die soon. Eliza replied that even if she died, she would still not give up. At that moment, she was supported by those who were also orphans and grew up in this palace. But this situation only amused the man. Afterwards, he said to kill everyone, but bring the girl alive. At that moment, the battle began again. Approaching Eliza, some of the students said that she was lucky and that she had to be taken alive. Eliza was trembling with fear, but said that she was not afraid of them. Then the student decided that it would be okay if he cut off one of her hands. Because of this, Eliza became scared and closed her eyes. However, someone unexpectedly knocked the student down. Surprised, Eliza turned in the direction from which the attack came. It turns out that the spirit of the wolf stood up for her. Saw the spirit, Kylie couldn't believe her eyes. The wolf also entered the fight and began to attack everyone in a row. Then they decided to attack Kylie from behind. She noticed it in time and turned around. However, at that moment, a wolf appeared in front of her and covered her. The man said he didn't expect them to raise a demonic beast, but he believed that even the snow wolf would not change today. But suddenly he heard another voice. Someone in the distance asked if he could change this day. At that moment, Mark appeared in front of the man. His appearance caused the ground to crack slightly and dust to rise around. Seeing him, Kylie burst into tears. Because of her reaction, the man realized it was Mark. Others were also surprised, because Mark should have been locked in the ruins. Without turning around, Mark told the wolf to kill everyone, starting with the weakest. Then the wolf howled and began to drain his aura. Then other wolf spirits appeared around and began to attack the enemies. The man told Mark that even he couldn't change the situation. After this, they decided to attack Mark from all sides. But he said with a grin that they could only try to kill him. At the same time, he activated his appraising gaze. In one moment, he learned everything about his opponents. And getting angry, he called them a bunch of old bastards. Afterwards, Mark activated several crazy modes. And at the same time, his dragon spirit appeared. While he was attacking the enemies, Mark armed himself. And getting ready to attack, he suggested that everyone try something new. Then he began to emit a lot of light and aura. It was a powerful attack that killed several enemies at once. At that time, Mark received many reports of murders. The man was angry that Mark dared to kill his students in front of him. He wanted to attack Mark, but someone was going to stop him. However, he noticed someone approaching and told the man to get out of the way. Unable to dodge the attack, the old woman took it upon herself. Seeing this, Kylie began to worry about her condition. Then Mark decided to deal with him before he caused even more trouble. But he continued to attack other students, and this angered the man. He became angry and shouted, Instantly, his appearance changed and his fighting abilities increased. Then he decided to show Mark the true power of his clan. He swung and attacked with his weapon. Kylie thought the man was using a forbidden technique to increase his strength. Meanwhile, he told Mark that it was his time to die. Wanting to kill Mark, he swung and hit, but the guy dodged the blow. This surprised the clan leader. Then he continued to attack, promising to knock the arrogance out of Mark. But Mark avoided his attacks every time, and he told the man that they would see who would be the winner. Armed, he prepared to attack, and he sent his dragon at the clan leader. He didn't have time to dodge and took the blow himself, and Mark's attack pierced the man's chest. Suddenly, he burst into flames and fell to the ground. Then, with a trembling hand, he pointed at Mark and wanted to say something. However, he did not have time to do this and died. Seeing that Mark had killed him, everyone was surprised. Eliza also noticed this and became alarmed. And Kylie was surprised that Mark became even stronger. The others were taken aback when they saw that Mark had killed his opponent with one blow. Noticing them, Mark asked if they had anything to say before they died, and he said they would be next. Having said this, Mark rushed forward. The man didn't have time to react before Mark's weapon pierced him. Afterwards, his wound also began to burn and he fell to the ground. Realizing that the guy was a monster, the third tried to escape. But Mark told him it was too late to regret. Having said this, he attacked the man. Mark wanted everyone to pay for their actions. After finishing with the leaders, Mark asked if anyone else wanted to fight. But then someone was found who decided to surrender and promised that they would never disturb this palace again. In despair, the man even bowed to Mark. But the old woman smiled that after all their enemies asked for mercy. Realizing what she wanted to do, Mark stopped her and asked her to let him do it. And without waiting for an answer, he attacked the man. The system immediately counted the kill and issued rewards.